Everybody, welcome to the Housing and Environment Overview Scrutiny Committee this Thursday the 10th of April. We have two main papers for the evening, but I will go through the agenda as we have it down in front of us. Fire evacuation procedures. There is no there's nothing called for, so anything that does go off is genuine. And I believe 90% of the people in the room know that basically downstairs out to the War Memorial Park. Webcast of meeting, that will be lit up red and come up. Yes, it is. We are webcast and we are live. Item 3, you receive apologies for absence. We have no apologies for absence, but we do have resignations and replacements, which is item 4. Councillor Baker has been replaced by Councillor James, and we welcome him in a few minutes, I assume. Councillor Court has been replaced by Councillor Tucker, who we welcome, thank you. Councillor Wooldridge has been replaced by Councillor Harvey, we welcome you tonight. Declarations of conflict of interest or whipping decisions, I'm not aware of any. If anyone would like to say anything? No, in which case we move on. Item 6, urgent items, none. Item 7, to confirm the minutes. The minutes are as in the papers sent to us. Paper A. Could I please have a proposal and a seconder for paper A? Councillor Luke, thank you. Councillor Peach. Councillor Leeks and Councillor Peach. Thank you. All those in favour? Can we have a please show of hands for those in favour of the minutes? 1, 2, 3, 4. Are those against? We have 4 for, no against. Thank you very much. That's done. Item 8, member and public participation upon issues within the agenda. We have, for paper B, Mike Shepherd from Sentinel. I welcome him here. For paper C, Martin Heath and Sheila Peacock. I welcome them. As is normal practice, if we have more people for one paper than another, we do try to bring that paper forward. And I believe on paper C, one of the members wishes to go a bit earlier. So unless there's any strong objections, we'll bring paper C in front of paper B. Item 9, standing invitation to portfolio holders. We have one portfolio holder. We have an apology from the other. So we did have an apology from the other portfolio holder, yes. 10, referrals from other committees, none. Issues referred by Cabinet, none. Item 12, hopefully is relatively quick. Hopefully you've got it in front of you. Tree shading panel. Tree appeal, single issue panel. The current members are Councillor Beerman, Frankham, Hussey and Mrs Tucker. We have no information to say that they're not prepared to stand unless anybody wishes to say anything tonight. Yes. Sorry?
Reluctantly continue to stagger on there.
Thank you, Councillor Beerman. We have a space for one more person. It would be nice to have that person tonight, but it's not essential. It can go through the group leaders procedure if we don't find anybody tonight. I'm looking around and I'm not seeing any volunteers. We're on item 12, tree shading panel. We're short of one person. Sorry, was that a genuine yes, Gavin? Thank you very much. Right, we now have a tree shading panel complete. Thank you. Right, for clarification, Councillors Beerman, Frankham, Hussey, Mrs Tucker, and now Councillor James. Right. We only have 2 items left on the agenda, items 13 and item 14. 13 is the sensible housing, and 14 is the climate change strategy. So if we can take paper C first, which is the climate change strategy. I'll hand over to the portfolio holder.
Thank you, Chairman. The climate change strategy is in front of you, and I've asked the officers who will do a resumé of the paper in a moment. I just wanted to introduce it to say, first of all, this paper has been delayed. When we first took the outline climate change strategy to an evening session with a lot of the environmental groups across the borough, the feedback was that we needed to radically improve it. We took that on board, we took it back, and we have made a lot of those improvements. That is hence where the delay, and we've taken it up. I'd rather have a delayed good paper than a quick and on time bad one. So we have the thing. Now, when we consider a climate change paper, we have to consider what we're wanting to do. There will, I am sure, be calls tonight for us to be the most ambitious, most exciting, most stringent council in the country. We have a choice to make. We have a choice whether to set our targets of ones that we're in control of and the ones that we can influence, or whether we have targets which are better influenced by national. We've chosen clearly to go for the first option, to go for what we're in control of and what we can do and how we can influence our local communities. However, what I would say is this is still out. It has been through consultation and some excellent feedback has been gained from that. There is still opportunity to amend this paper, and I'm more than willing to do that before we bring it before Cabinet, and the officers are the same mind. So I would encourage all of you to participate in the discussion and give us the constructive how we improve this thing. And I'll pass over to Mark Lambert, whose team has been doing an excellent job on this, whilst he's had another little plan to be doing as well. So I think we need to acknowledge that and say he's not exactly been slack on his work plan recently. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've only got a few slides to run through just to introduce the paper, so I won't keep you for too long for this discussion. Just a little bit about the climate change strategy. It replaces a version that we last adopted in 2008. And as you'll be aware, a great deal happens in terms of climate change and research since 2008. So much has changed. We've also adopted a number of strategies since that time. So this has been a good opportunity to refresh it and bring it up to date. We've had various successes since 2008. For example, we've reduced our carbon emissions from our own operations by 21% since 2007, so quite a success in that sense. We've also supported a number of specific initiatives, a number of local groups, and we're working to make sure that the climate change issue is ingrained in a number of other strategies, so quite a few successes there. We tried to make the strategy as short and snappy as possible, so we've got 3 pledges centred around reducing our carbon emissions and leading by example, helping others to reduce their own emissions, and working with partners and residents to raise awareness and support initiatives and to mitigate the impacts of climate change. For each pledge that we've got, we've set out what policies and strategies are in place to help to deliver those, what actions are we taking and what actions are our partners taking, what grant funding opportunities are available, what are the targets, and how are the partners contributing. Obviously there's a great deal of work going on at the grassroots level that we're keen to tap into and support. As Councillor Donnell mentioned, we undertook consultation earlier this year. We had 15 comments, not a great number, but the quality of the comments was high, and obviously people have put a lot of time into coming back to us with their views. Some of the main issues that were raised was the need for targets in respect to greenhouse gas reductions at a timescale to do so, targets for renewable energy, and again a timescale is required for those, a need for further baseline information, requirement for us to strive towards the highest possible building standards, and a need to work more closely with the business community, including the local enterprise partnership. The comments back through the climate change panel at the end of February. I know there's a couple of members around the table this evening that were there. Members of the panel noted that the concept that there should be more targets in the strategy, and we had a discussion around how we actually bring targets into it, given our relatively limited influence over the activities of residents and things taking place in the borough. But we did agree that it was sensible to adopt the national targets for greenhouse gas emissions and for renewable energy. And it was noted also that there is greater awareness of the issues of climate change amongst the LEP partners. The second part of the report is just on a green investment fund, and just to remind councillors that this was set aside in last year's budget, and there was £1 million set aside for this. We sought views on how this money could be utilised through the consultation. Excuse me. And I was just going to highlight a few of the comments we received. One suggestion was that it should be recreated as a green initiatives fund on the basis that it should be used for community benefit without necessarily the need to make a return. Another suggestion was that it should be invested in renewable energy so that we make a long-term return from that investment. We make interest-free loans available for residents for things like solar panels and improved insulation. That we invest in our ecosystem through carbon capture in the borough's biodiversity. And potentially that we seek to invest £25 million in renewable energy technologies for a longer term return, and £25 on energy efficiency measures. This was discussed at the climate change panel, and we talked around the idea of having a revolving fund whereby you can invest or loan the money effectively to community groups to undertake renewable projects, and we will then seek an ongoing return back in terms of the payment for that money, and then we could then keep reinvesting that. It's probably worth flagging up, as an aside, that there's a report going to the EPP Oscom later this month on the property and alternative investment strategy, and that sets out a number of connected initiatives that are being considered that members may wish to be aware of. I understand that there's a proposal to set up a member officer working group to think about some of these issues. Just a reminder of the recommendation, which is to note the progress achieved to date, to provide comments on the content of the updated strategy document prior to consideration by Cabinet, and to provide comments on the future use of the Green Investment Fund, again to help to consider and prioritise spending moving forwards.
Thank you. Would anybody like to indicate whether they've got questions, please? We'll make a list up here. Councillor Harvey. Councillor Beerman. Councillor Washbourne. Councillor James. Councillor Tucker. Right, we will start with that list, thank you. My apologies. It is normal practice to go to the outside speakers first. I've been reminded. Thank you very much. So would either Martin Heath or Sheila Peacock like to come forward and speak? Welcome to the committee, and you have 4 minutes. So, again, I've been corrected 2 minutes.
I'll stick with the 4. Many thanks, Chair, and thanks for the committee, and thanks for the opportunity to address you tonight. I'm Martin Heath from Basingstoke Transition Network. We did submit quite a detailed response to the draft plan, and I think our response is the new plan, or strategy, is, yes, perhaps a bit of a curate's egg. Good in places, indeed, in 1 or 2 places it's excellent. And it's, I think Councillor Donnell said, it's a radical improvement on the draft. But as all curate's eggs are, there are some serious serious weaknesses and serious areas that really need to be addressed. Perhaps to start with, it's not a strategy. You know, I spent 20 years working in strategy in one of the world's largest management consulting firms. I've worked with many of the world's largest corporates in putting strategies together. And I begin to know when I see it. This isn't one. Strategy is about determination of goals. It's about adoption of actions. It's about action plans. And most importantly, it's about allocating resources, the necessary resources to deliver the goals and to deliver the actions. Now, there's some great goals in this strategy. 15% of all the renewable energy in the district by 2020 coming from renewable sources, 20% of all our energy, 34% reduction in carbon, that's brilliant. 80% by 2050, again, very laudable objectives. But where are the actions? Where are the resources to deliver this? They're just not there. Now, there's lots of pledges, The pledges is a noun. It means a solemn promise. It's also a verb. It means to commit. But there's no commitment. There's no ambition. There's no vision. Indeed, there's a mismatch, and I noticed the officers, and they've done a great job, by the way, the officers, in putting this together. I've talked about £25 million to be invested in energy efficiency, £25 million to be invested in renewable technology. Now, they're great. They're in the paper. But yet, when you read strategy, they're not there. Gone. They're in the paper, but not in the strategy.
So that is time, but I think we should let you speak for a bit longer because we are trying to get the best paper out of this.
Okay, thank you very much. That's much appreciated.
Can you just switch on? Chair, may I ask whether you might be indulgent enough to allow the speakers 4 minutes? Firstly, then they know what they've got and they can work to it. And secondly, even if well, there's only 2 speakers, that's only another 8 minutes, whereas you say an important topic, and if I can ask for that.
I see no problem with that because we are actually trying to get the best paper we can out of it, and I believe he's fairly skilled in this area.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll willingly take the other 2 minutes. And many thanks for that. And I promised, well, I pledge not to go over the 2 minutes. Yeah, the paper is absolutely clear, and so is the strategy. This is the greatest threat facing the human race. That's the importance of what we're talking about tonight, the greatest threat facing the human race. And it's beyond doubt that threat is being caused by the 1.4 million tonnes of CO2 this borough emits every single year. But it's also caused by the 3,400 tonnes of methane that we produce in this borough every year. Unfortunately, this strategy doesn't even mention methane. The methane is 72 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Yet our strategy doesn't even focus on it. That's 15% of all of our emissions are just completely ignored. Now, 90% of all of our emissions come from fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels, for our transport, to heat our homes and our buildings, and to power our gadgets. And the 2 major sources of carbon emissions in this town, and this borough, are our buildings and our transport. And those 2 areas where this council, this local authority, has a huge influence. Yet I hear excuses. I hear excuses that this is all too difficult. We can't set targets. They're not under our control. We have no influence. We're solving the biggest challenge facing the human race is not going to be easy. And it's ridiculous for us as a council to say it's all too difficult. We're not going to set targets. It's all too difficult. We don't have any influence. We have a huge influence over the carbon emissions from this borough through our planning policies and our transport policies. It is up to us as a council and as a borough to actually take on that challenge and not to sit back and say, too difficult, lots of excuses. So let's make it clear. This is not going to be easy. It's going to need lots of resources. It's going to need ambitious targets. And I don't want us necessarily to be the best in the country. I just don't want us to be one of the worst. And if we're halfway, it may be good. So we have to start doing this now, and we have to stop making those excuses. It's going to be difficult, and it is about putting those resources in place. It's about setting targets, and it's about employing resources, and that's what we have got to do. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Would Mr. Suda Peacock like to come forward now? Sorry, if there are any questions to you, I will allow the odd one. I don't wish this to go on till midnight, though. Councillor Beerman, you were indicating.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered whether Mr. Heath had a suggestion in terms of the Green Investment Fund. He might have submitted it already, but since that investment fund is there, does he have particular things that he can point to at this point and say, why isn't the fund being used in this way?
Thanks, Councillor Beerman. Indeed, yes, I've made presentations to Councillor Saunders, to Tony Curtis, to John Izzett. I was today with Kevin Jaquist, the head of finance in the council, giving them detailed explanations of what they need to do with the money that's available to this borough I'm happy to come back to this committee and give them the presentation as well, if they're willing to hear it. Yes, there are some very significant and very detailed plans that we've put to members of the council, senior officers of the council. We've also been to the senior management team as well. They're getting detailed view of what needs to be done, the actions required, and the money required. And to sum it up, it does mean £25 million invested in renewable energy, and it does mean £25 million invested in energy efficiency. And these are investments, these are not expenditures. And this council is sitting on £150 million worth of cash, earning less than 2% in a bank account.
Okay, thank you. Councillor James, this has been the last question.
Martin, the Labour Group are really keen in their manifesto. They talk about using the property portfolio and also using community buildings that we own to put solar panels on. What would be is that possible? What would be the benefit of that? And how could we achieve this going forward?
Yeah, thanks. Well, Basingstoke actually is blessed with lots of roofs. You take a satellite picture of Basingstoke, and you'll see there are about 2.8 square kilometres of commercial roof in Basingstoke, all of which is suitable for putting solar panels on it. Now, we can put about 90 megawatts of solar panels on the roofs of those buildings in Basingstoke. Now, interestingly, almost all of those roofs are owned by the local council, so we have control over those buildings. That 90 megawatts would reduce about 10% of all the electricity needs of the whole town, if we so wish to do it, if we had the ambition. And going back to community buildings, great idea. Brookvale Community Hall has already put 10 kilowatts on its roofs. Basingstoke College of Technology have put 100 kilowatts of solar on their roofs. So these are the things that can be done. And this council is a council sitting on two huge resources. It's got cash in the bank and it's got roofs. There's nothing stopping it actually making a huge impact on the carbon emissions of this town if it wanted to.
Thank you. I'll now ask Sheila Peacock to come forward, please. You technically have 2 minutes, but I will be flexible, as has already been seen.
I'm Sheila Peacock, also from Basingstoke Transition Movement. I just want to make one point, which is that shale gas, also known as fracking, is something that might end up happening in our town, and it's incompatible with a carbon reduction plan. Never mind the earthquakes or the risk to groundwater. The shale gas is a fossil fuel. And if we extract it and burn it, then we are adding to the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and essentially putting off the day when we have to get to grips with the energy problem. And the council is in a position when it comes to planning applications for exploration and drilling for shale gas to prevent it from happening. The county council didn't take an opportunity with this when a motion was put before it, but there's no reason why the borough council should not take a stance and also encourage neighbouring councils, because to be honest, we could put the borehole just outside our boundaries and do sideways drilling to get underneath Basingstoke and Dean without actually having the wellhead in our patch. But climate change doesn't respect borders, and I know the argument is we want more energy security by getting the gas ourselves rather than importing it from Norway, but all we will do, if we increase the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we will end up importing bad weather essentially from Norway or from the other direction, just as we have seen this winter. And so that's the one point that I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Are there any pressing questions? Councillor Beerman?
I'll be slightly cheeky, and I fully understand if Ms Peacock says no, can't answer that, because one of the points raised by your colleague was methane gas. And you provoked me to think about it because, of course, fracking has a lot to do with methane production. But putting aside, if one didn't have any fracking, and assuming we could, though I'm not sure we can prevent fracking in our borough, but assuming for a moment that we did, there's other methane, and I believe cows have a lot to do with it, and other beasts, and even human beings quite a bit. Is there any plan that you could suggest, and it might be a bit of a googly for you, to prevent methane escape, because Mr. Heath was saying that's a big problem?
Well, off the top of my head, well, first of all, methane escape while you are fracking is, of course, a possibility and requires both good engineering and, in my opinion, careful inspection. In fact, I've written a motion which I hope is going to go to the National Council of my trade union to advocate that independent inspection of the drilling sites for fracking to ensure that all the correct procedures are gone through to avoid the groundwater and the methane escape and the earthquakes is carried out. And otherwise, methane, of course, another source of methane is sewage, and it has been suggested that an anaerobic digestion system be installed, for instance, at Manydown, to avoid the problem that was raised at the planning committee with the fact that the developments are on the west side of Basingstoke and the sewage works is on the east side, and we're having to pump the sewage across there, and there must surely be a possibility of leaks of methane from that, and that if we are sensible and build an anaerobic digestive system, then it will reduce the amount of sewage we have to dispose of, and it will allow us to control the release of methane in such a way that we can use it for cooking and the other useful purposes for which methane is a really useful substance. And that if this is taken on board as part of the local plan, then it should greatly reduce the environmental footprint of the Manydown and other proposed new housing estates on the west side of town.
I will have one more question from Councillor Reid.
Thank you. If I may, you've mentioned anaerobic digester, which is why I'd like to just jump in on that. We've had one installed very close to my ward recently at Carousel Dairy at Farley, and that has resulted in a significant increase in heavy vehicle traffic running through the estates of my ward in Hatch Warren. So I wonder whether there is actually a way of monitoring or actually proving that what you perhaps might gain with an AD, you might also lose because of the increase in heavy vehicle traffic.
I don't think I know the answer to that, except to wonder whether the heavy vehicle traffic is a consequence of the fact that the anaerobic digestion system is not plumbed in, shall we say, and therefore all the waste that goes into it has to be brought in by vehicle. Whereas if you start from scratch with a brand new estate, you could put in the infrastructure in the form of additional sewage pipes to convey the substances into the digester without having to use vehicle traffic. Martin, perhaps if you ask him afterwards, may be able to enlighten us more on that.
Thank you very much. I do have a list of questioners. Councillor Harvey, Councillor Beerman, Councillor Washbourne, Councillor Jones, Tucker and Reid. Councillor Harvey, you were first.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 5 questions, so by all means split them up if you'd like to. No issue with that. My first question relates to, not unsurprisingly, buses. Buses. And if I go to page 54 of 81, what we've got at the bottom of the page there is a paragraph relating to a requirement for travel plans for certain types of development to offer a choice of travel modes, and so on in the paragraph. And then if we go to page 61, at the top of the page, we have the action point that relates to ensure walking and cycling and the use of public transport. Now, what concerns me is, again, the disengagement between the two strategies here. We've got these set out as goals, and then we have the reality of what we're seeing happening on the ground. Now, what I'd like to try to understand, and I know that Mark can help me with this from a transport point of view, not only this, but the local plan, of where does this join up? Because this doesn't link to the local plan, because there is only one line in the local plan regarding cycling. It doesn't link to the buses, because we're obviously seeing the cuts that are being proposed in regard to public transport. And then if we look to development control, We have applications that have been rejected but are nonetheless going through on appeal, where development is not having due regard, Blazes Farm, Kiln Farm, all of those, to the issue of public transport. So if I could just have a response from, in terms of where does this go with joining all these up, from an officer perspective and from the cabinet member's perspective, because Robert wants to jump in and I appreciate that.
Councillor Tennell?
I think first we have to realise that this strategy isn't in place yet until it is adopted, so we can't really follow it in other areas, and it won't have as much force. I see, I'm going to jump in here because I think it actually could be relevant for a lot of other queries coming through. I've always seen the climate change strategy as being one of those strategies that should sit in the same way that our equality strategy sits. In the same way that those very large corporate strategies sit across the organisation that drive the ethos and how we work as an organisation. Now, we have an equality strategy, but that will flow down into a lot of the other implementational strategies right the way through the organisation. I think in many ways, climate change is the same. It should be the overarching strategy of where we're going as an organisation, but a lot of the actual elements of how we do it will be picked up in different things. So yeah, we could have chosen to put a large amount of public transport, which is obviously a very important thing for climate change strategy, into this document. But it starts to beg the question, what do you leave out of a climate change strategy then? It starts to become the only strategy we have for the entire council, because everything we do as a council and everything we do will have an impact on climate change strategy. So my clear thing was the individual actions around the buses and the promotion cycling, improving walking, which I totally back, will be picked up in our transport review and will be picked up by the public transport policies that Councillor Osselton is bringing forward as of now. Much as I would like to be able to tell Stagecoach what they can do with their money, I'm not sure we actually can. They are a private company. So we have to have some element around that. Mark, you may want to add some more detail.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the only thing I would add is that the County Council are currently at the very early stages of preparing a cycling strategy for the county as a whole. So that will pick up some other elements that perhaps aren't necessarily detailed in the climate change strategy itself, but along the lines that Councillor Donnell mentioned, other strategies will pick up the detail.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come back to that in the debate, and thank you for the answer. My second question relates to fuel poverty. If we go to page 55 of the report, right at the bottom, we've got working with utility companies to ensure that residents' visitors' needs are met and utilising the most appropriate forms of energy efficiency and climate change. And then if we go to page 58, we have the column with the switch Hampshire. The bit that's missing for me, and I appreciate the point here, and it's positive that we've got 10% went forward for actually switching their supplies and they're saving money. We want people to save money. But what there isn't in here is anything I can identify as a strategy or a line that relates to something for this council taking action on fuel poverty. And if it's in here, I apologise and I've missed it. But if it isn't in here, then it is something we need to pick up on, and I would be disappointed that there wouldn't be strategy or some sense of direction, as you say, ethos-wise, to future policy or other policy to do something on the issue of fuel poverty.
Thank you, Councillors. It's in there, it's not specifically in there, it's perhaps hidden away in the words, but we are working closely to take advantage of the government's eco-funding, the energy company obligation. And so we're working with Hart District Council and a separate company to try to ensure that as many residents, and particularly those in fuel poverty, can benefit from this initiative. So we launched it in a kind of low-key way in February, and we're looking to roll it out once we establish the programme of works. But that's quite an exciting area of work, which I think will help to address some of the issues you've raised, Councillor.
Can I commend you on that? And can I say the thing that strikes me as being important, Chair, is that I know you're rolling it out, but the amount of fuel poverty and the issue that is for people in Basingstoke is huge. So slowly might be right in terms of the strategy, but I would urge you to bring that forward. And it needs to be in here. We need to tell people what we're doing then. If that is such as good as you describe, then I think it's something that we need to be promoting. My next question relates to open space, Chair, page 55 again. We've got here talking about ensure the provision of appropriate open space, including allotments. You would not be surprised to hear me talking about allotments as part of a new development and opportunities to grow their own produce. And then if we go to page 60, I was looking at the action point here, and again, it's this notion of the provision of appropriate open space. Again, ethos, let's link it to the plan. The local plan talks about minimums and expectations. The massive debate that took place at that meeting was around allowing developers to get away with the minimums. And it doesn't surprise the portfolio holder that I'm raising this. But we see what the developers are doing, bringing it forward, and they are utilising the minimum and avoiding the expected. It's exactly what we said it would be. So my concern is the aspiration is brilliant and sound, but the actuality of what we're seeing is something different. Will you pick that up? And will you give an undertaking? Then were we able to enforce, if we were, in the best way possible, the expected, we stay there and not have to see the minimum, which isn't what people and communities want.
You have to be very careful. This is not a rehash of local plan arguments. Also, this is not the local plan. This is the climate change strategy. I'm very pleased that the minimums of open space within the local plan, and I'm sure Mark Keating are actually higher than what we had before. Now, our minimums are higher than the levels of open space that we were operating before. That is an improvement. And yet we're still saying we want more, we want the expected standards. And indeed, we want higher than the expected standards. We should not, and I think it has been discounted in this meeting, discount the sheer power of Switch Hampshire and the Switch programme. It is a fantastic programme, and we should be doing everything we can to promote it. And we did an awful lot of communications on. Mark's already outlined the eco-funding work we do. Personally, I don't think putting a line in a strategy about eco-funding is particularly the best way of publicising it to the residents of Basingstoke. Kind of think probably the communications department could come up with more exciting ways of communicating that out than a line in the strategy. Perhaps I'm wrong. I'm not convinced a huge number of people read the council strategies as their major point of communication about their fuel bills. I might be wrong. I don't think I am. But we are and we will be doing a lot of the communications around these programmes going forward.
Councillor Harvey, thank you. That's the point. It's the making it aware to the members of the public in the best way possible. The line in here holds us to it. That's the point. I appreciate what you're saying. In terms of the open spaces then, just to be absolutely clear, and you can't rehash the local plan. So the issue is the climate change strategy is coming now, and we've already moved forward with the local plan. So the issue for me is that the minimums aren't an increase. Look at that detail. It is quite, and the P&I committee was clear that they were not an increase either. The P&I committee raised several concerns over those issues. Okay, move on to my fourth question. On page 62, there is one line that I think is really important to the residents of Buckskin in particular. They're not the only residents in the borough, but they are relevant in terms of to deliver identified actions in the multi-agency flood plan and with appropriate advice on extreme weather conditions. I handed in a letter on behalf of residents of Buckskin this afternoon to the leader in regard to concerns they have that evidence exists that the authorities were aware of the risk to Buckskin a number of years ago. I would hope that you would take note of that, if I can ask the officers to take note of that. This isn't a political point at all, this is a point about making the strategy relate to what the issues are. And I would ask the officers to carefully look at that letter that's been handed to the Borough Council on the basis that the issues raised by the residents are reflected in the strategy, and we can, through what has been asked for, which is public scrutiny of the issues, affect some pretty important change and give those residents confidence. I appreciate you would not have read the letter because it was handed to the leader. You may have seen it, I'm not sure. The point being, it raises issues that relate specifically to this bullet point. So I would hope that they can be picked up and run with, please.
If I may come in there, when those houses were originally went to planning application, they were refused by this council. They then went to appeal, and those in the valley bit of Buckskin were built. This actually reinforces the need for this borough to control its own future and have its own policies in place.
I'm sorry, can I just, well, are we getting at cross purposes here? Because I'm talking about the area of Buckskin that flooded, and it's the 1960s houses, it's the old LDC houses, it's not the new estates.
That is correct. Yes, they were refused originally. and it went to appeal and they were built, because that always used to flood years ago.
Exactly.
They were built in a floodplain where it used to flood, hence they were originally refused, but they were then passed on appeal.
Thank you, Chair, because then that raises some more evidence that we need to add to the list of issues here. If we knew that, that is a very serious point. Thank you for raising that, and I'll make a note of that and add that to my letter on behalf of the residents. If we were aware of that back when these houses were built, that raises a very serious issue. Thank you, Chair.
I haven't read your letter yet, Councillor Harvey. I'm sure that'll be treated with, I haven't read the letter yet, and I'm sure that'll be treated in the way that all your comments are treated by this council. As we can move forward, I think that the core thing here is that we have to look at what the impact is of our local plan. That is being done. But I want to just take a step back and say, I think we should also take this opportunity yet again to thank the council officers for the amount of work they did over the buckskin crisis. I think it's important that we do that, and I think it's very important we do that when, you know, things are being said. So I'd like to hope the committee would join me in that.
Hear, hear, Robert. Absolutely right. Our officers were absolutely superb and brilliant in the way they responded. And I know, being there as much as I was, I saw them do the job, and they were absolutely brilliant, as others were around this table, and Councillor Reid will attest to that, I'm sure. Absolutely superb. Nonetheless, the residents have raised their questions, and it's important that we address them seriously. So I hope the residents' questions are given the due respect they deserve, even if I'm not. In terms of the final question, that it relates to the performance panel. The performance panel raised a number of issues around the recycling, and I couldn't find much about recycling necessarily, but then again, the direction of travel being an ethos rather than a detailed strategy relates to that, doesn't it? They were concerned that in Q3 of last year, the recycling rate reduced from Q2, and there was a sense of what is the direction of travel here. I'd be interested to know if there are figures any more than what was produced for the performance panel, but I would like a comment on all the ambition in here is one thing, but the direction of travel as far as the performance panel is concerned was not in that direction of travel that we want to see it going in. It was negative, not positive. Why is that? What was the reason for that? Do we know that? And if not, could we have a response that gives us the information of why was that the case?
Councillor Donnell.
I think that a lot of response actually is in the response from the officers and from myself to the performance panel, and I can share that back. In essence, recycling figures do fluctuate before. You will have noticed that the biggest determinant of the recycling figures decrease in those periods was actually we collected more litter. Now, obviously litter does not count as recycling. So you collect more litter, your recycling percentage goes down. Still think it's a good thing to collect more recycling. There was also a factor around the green garden waste, although we have more people signed up for the service than any before. Weather implications, you'll get less green garden waste. Now, what's been the positives on recycling? Curbside glass recycling has massively improved the amount of glass we've started to collect, and that's been an advantage. Certainly if we didn't have that, as was the policy of some people around this table, we would be in a worse position. And I think the addition that we've just announced for Tetra Paks and hard plastic make another vital step forward in that. We do have to balance on recycling both how draconian we are with our residents, and I certainly don't want to be someone who is that draconian, but also about how many boxes, bags, bins, etc. we give out. Looking at my own ward, there's certainly not the space outside their front doors or their back doors for many more bins, which is why I've been making rather a lot of noise at Project Integra, and I'm very pleased, as I announced in the council chamber, that they've now agreed to look seriously at including more things that they can recycle out of the green bin. And that's something I think that really needs to be pressed, and I'm glad I've got the county cabinet members backing on that one.
Councillor Harvey, I need to move on and we'll come back if we've got time.
That's fine. I'll leave that comment for the debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move to Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. I too have more than one question. Starting, if I may, on page 42 of 81, paragraph 4.7, where there is reference to the Hampshire Sustainable Business Partnership. A free quarterly meeting is a lovely thing, and there's probably free sandwiches, I don't know. But beyond that, can we at this stage point to anything of substance that's been achieved, apart from the obvious benefits generally of networking, but that's identifiable?
The group has met a number of occasions the past 6-8 months or so, and I think that the main purpose of the group is to share best practice, and they've had speakers from different specialities coming in to update the group on where they can improve their carbon efficiency, carbon performance, and they've also had updates in terms of travel planning to help in terms of the manner in which people travel to work. So those are obvious ones that spring to mind. I can get you a full agenda if that would be helpful. I don't have it to hand, unfortunately.
If I may, Chair, I think it's because I think the businesses are equally important, if not in some ways more important than the households for dealing with these things. Certainly the way that waste is collected from businesses is a big issue, because at the moment it isn't done very well in terms of the segregation. That's not our fault. And then, as Mr. Heath was saying earlier about the roofs, not just ours, but there are a lot of factory buildings which lend themselves more to use for solar panels than do households, where roofs tend to be more complex. So that sort of thing seems to be a good opportunity, but I'd like to see what's happening there. EPP was mentioned as a forthcoming meeting with something interesting. I didn't pick up Basing View within that. Now, Basing View has been presented very much as a green project, and it's been suggested to me that the green is going a bit yellow. And I would be quite interested in being given some confidence that the greenness is very much there, and in what forms, because it's quite a long time since consultants have been working on this now, but there are no headline suggestions that I've seen. There was an if and a but about a district heating system, but I get the impression that that might be a big but now. Is there anything, again, tangible there, rather than good ideas and good aspirations?
I'll ask the portfolio holder to come in first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point on the Hampshire Sustainable Business Partnership. This is primarily targeted against the small to medium enterprises. Working for one of those, I think we have to be careful that although we can give free advice, if we start getting too constraining that we want reports back from them about what they have done with this, so we get, we can feel absolutely, well, they just won't give us that information. They've got to go and get this country out of its depression and recession. So we have to focus that there will be things we do with local businesses that we will not have access to what they do. We will not have access to what they do, but we have to trust that by giving that good information, it will have a positive impact. On Basing View, I would encourage the councillor to go along to the Basing View meetings. I know Councillor Ger Warden would welcome you there. It gets quite lonely, no one comes along to them to talk to them. So I would encourage you to go along there and make your points. I think the last meeting lasted 7 minutes, so there's certainly time on the agenda for you to go and speak to them, Councillor Beaman.
He lets me go to that meeting but not speak at this one. I take the point about small businesses not being required, for heaven's sake, to start filling forms saying what they're doing and things like that. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for the people who are coordinating this project. I'm sure that every now and then, at least it happens whenever I go to one of our events, you get a little feedback form saying, what did you think of this? What did you gain from this? Etc., etc. And we must have some form that we're monitoring whether we're really wasting our time, because really, if it's just a talking shop that's not producing anything, it's not good expenditure. Can I move on to the reference to the Environment Officer's appraisal? Now, I like that, with, as a concept again, not for bashing people over the head, but I'd like to question, are we actually, do they in some way or another get a pay bonus if they achieve something? How are the objectives and then the meeting of the objectives tested?
Actually, this year was the first year that we've introduced these objectives for the champions, so we haven't really had a chance to go through the full year for the final appraisal, but they were introduced that there's a standard objective for all of the champions, and it's envisaged that the relevant line manager will be contacted by either Lucy or myself for some engagement as to how that individual has participated in the Environment Champions work over the past 12 months, so that we can give some feedback to the line manager for when the appraisal takes place.
So work in progress by the sound of it. For my sins, together with Councillor Aldridge, who isn't here tonight, but I sit on the so-called Basingstoke Bicycle Users Group. And you make reference to the HCC cycle strategy. In the more distant past, Hampshire were good participants in the group. They didn't always come up with the goods. They said plenty of very lovely things, but there didn't seem to be any money at the end of the day so often. But now, there's not even the engagement from an officer, a Hampshire officer, who after all in terms of cycling and highway issues is such a crucial person, doesn't participate in these group meetings. I want to ask you whether there's at least an assurance that this strategy that's being worked up will engage the Basingstoke Bicycle Users Group so that they can hopefully positively and constructively have some input.
I believe Councillor Steele wishes to answer this point. Oh, Councillor Donnell.
I was only just going to chip in as I saw Councillor Steele lean forward, so I'm sure she's on deck. I agree BBUG is a very good organisation. It needs engagement, and I'm sure Councillor Steele will ensure that it happens.
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, it's already happening. We have our very own cycling champion at Hampshire County Council, and actually Councillor Beerman's met him at the Anvil that evening when we were all together. I introduced you to him, and we've got a good strategy at Hampshire County Council on cycling. We take it very seriously, but I will put your views forward and make sure there's more coming forward.
Councillor Beerman, any more questions? I do, but I'm happy to have a break if you wish to move on for the moment, Jan. I'd like to, because Councillor Washbourne, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted just a point of clarification for those of us that were at the Climate Panel Committee, and Martin Heath's point tonight about the use of solar panels on our council buildings in Basingstoke, and he was saying that we have a number of suitable buildings. But if I remember rightly, we were having a discussion that was explored and there wasn't so many. So I'd just like to have a bit of clarification on where we are with that, or do we still need to go a bit further into looking and maybe working with Martin in order to do that?
I think I'm right in saying that we undertook some work a while ago, perhaps with Martin, to look at the scope for the borough's assets and whether they could be fitted with solar panels. And we've done some of our own research in terms of what applications we've been dealing with and which ones have been approved. So we've got some background in that sense. It's not terribly detailed, I'm afraid. It certainly doesn't look at the potential across the whole borough and say, out of the potential, we've got 10% installed. But it's just broad figures at the moment.
So you're saying at the moment that's just a work in progress, and obviously we're going to continue in that direction as with the strategy.
Councillor Donnell,
Thank you, Chairman. As members will be aware, we did a series of pilot projects where we looked at a series of routes using Martin under another guise as a contractor to look at the different routes we had and look at some pilots. That work is forthgoing. We have had some information through, and that is one of the strands that's being fed through to EPP for the Green Investment Fund. Certainly that is where we believe we would have the funding to make this live and happen, and where the funding would come from. So again, I would encourage councillors to go along to EPP and make their points then.
Councillor Washburn, have you finished your... In which case, move to Councillor James, please.
Can I just pick up on that point? Could I ask, because I'm not going to be able to get along to EPP, but could I ask for a written response, please, to all members of the pilots that are in place and what is going to be funded through the infrastructure fund, how many buildings and what work has been done? If you could just outline what work has been done.
Councillor Donnell, answer this.
I think that's an excellent point. I think that pilot work should go to EPP as one of the components of when they consider the Green Investment Fund. Obviously, we haven't made the decisions around the Green Investment Fund, and I'm sure no councillor around this table would want us to make the decisions before we put it through the relevant committees and consultation.
Councillor James, is there any more?
It's on the website. Those projects that have been successful in relation to the funding is on the website. Rather than that, what I'd like to know is, in relation to the pilot and what you talked about, Mark, is how many, what work has been done, which buildings have been identified, and is there scope for more potential? Because the question I asked, and I think what we're concerned about, is not just community buildings, but our whole property portfolio. So if we could have on something like that.
Sorry, just for clarification, I think that's a very good piece of work. I think it should be done. I'll ask for that to go through the BPP. That's a publicly accessible papers that all members will do. If we can get it done in time for EPP, we'll get it done in time. If not, I'll make sure it's sent to different members.
Sorry, it's not what I want to be done. What I'm saying is, could I just see what has been done? Mark said he's done a piece of work. I'd quite like to understand what's been done. Great moving forward, and we want to move forward, but I just want to know what's been done to date in relation to this piece of work.
Is it worth just me outlining exactly what I've done? And that's based on Martin's initial work, which looked at some of the council assets, particularly the things like pavilions and the council accommodation here. The work that I've been doing in addition to that is just to purely look at the planning applications that have been approved in the borough and see what megawatt potential there is there in terms of solar, if that's, in that particular instance. So it's quite sketchy in that sense, but I'm happy to circulate that. Just one point to add is that I'm not certain whether if we've approved these schemes, whether they've been implemented, so there may be that grey area, but I'm happy to circulate it.
Councillor James?
Thank you. On page 45 of 81, paragraph 4.17, the second bullet point says that 15% of energy demand to be provided by renewable energy sources by 2050. But if you go to page 50 of 81, which is part of the actual strategy, and go to the very last line, you can see that it's changed from 15% of energy from renewable sources by 2020. So just a quick question, which is it? Is it 50 or 20?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a typo. It should be 2020.
Thank you for picking that typo up.
Thank you. On page 52 of the 81 pledge, on page 52 of 81, the pledge one, this page is just relating to what the council is doing on its own as a borough. Why isn't there a borough-wide target, Councillor Dunell?
Much as we'd like to have the control over what we do as for carbon emissions through every business, every household and everything else, I'm not sure we could. We could, of course, get into the perverse things that if a large major employer closed down, shut their factory, laid off all the people, that would reduce our carbon emissions. It's not something any of us would want. So again, I think it's very important that this council focuses on first doing what it has direct control over, and I want us to have a target for what we as a council have direct control over, and that's what Pledge 1 is.
So the strategy isn't about, it's purely what we can do, not how we influence the wider. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely not. But in order to influence, you first have to do it yourself to a good standard. So I think it's absolutely important we have a pledge and a target about what we as an organisation do. If we as an organisation aren't doing this, how can we lead the community? How can we talk to local businesses? So I think it's absolutely right and fitting that the first pledge is about what we do. as an organisation. And there are other pledges about how we lead the communities and lead it through from that.
Thank you. On page 52, where it says it includes a target of 15% carbon reduction by 2016. But what are we going to do after 2016? We're only sort of 2 years away from that now. What's going to happen in relation to the strategy?
I'd like us to keep on reducing the carbon, but at the current moment, we probably don't know what the technology is in there. So I wouldn't want us to set too long-term targets, but it's a case, absolutely, we don't stop there. We carry on improving.
In some of the feedback from residents, or one of the concerns, and I think it's been picked up by Martin, is it says the pledges are laudable, but how do you measure success without smart targets? Where targets are provided, these are not very ambitious. Do you think this is an ambitious strategy, councillors now, and could we do more with the targets?
I totally agree that anything this council should have a smart target. Obviously, a lot of those will come through from the action plans, and as I prefix this whole meeting with, this again is a strategy, and a lot of those actions and the accurate, precise, detailed reporting will come through from in other elements of it. Do I think this strategy is ambitious? Yes, I do. I think it's ambitious for first setting our stall out as a council of what we want to do, and then moving forward about how we can lead the community.
Can I also talk about the target about building of lifetime standards? Because there isn't a target here. Should there be one, Councillor Dunn?
Can you just elaborate on what you mean by building on lifetime standards and give us a page reference?
Over the page, on page 55 of 81, the second bullet point that talks about the new developments, there is no target within the strategy about meeting building of lifetime standards, which we've always previously used.
Yeah, it's probably something in the local plan. I haven't got a copy of the local plan in front of me. You're right in saying that the existing adopted local plan has a target of 15%. I need to check what's in the emerging one to ensure they tie up. That's something that we can check.
Sorry, just to clarify.
Jez, we'll ask this to be last, and then we'll move on.
Just to clarify, do you mean lifetime homes? Or is, because and what's the fitting with that and climate change is what I'm just trying to get to. Whether it needs to be in here.
Mark, are you able to answer Councillor Peach's question?
Well, I'm not sure it's 100% relevant for climate change. Obviously, the climate change strategy sits alongside a number of other ones, and it's the local plan, I suppose, that primarily deals with that kind of issue.
I think I agree with Mark, it would be the local plan did. Excellent point. Mark will come back to the committee with what's in the emerging plan.
Councillor Tucker.
Thank you. My last question, it relates to ensure the provision of appropriate open space, and I wonder what we mean by appropriate. And again, I just want to pick up on the point that Councillor Harvey raised, is in relation to the local plan that's out for consultation, the actual standard, not whether it's going to meet the minimum or expected standard, but the actual standard is a lesser amount than we've got in the old plan. And just to bring it to your attention and to say how disappointed we were historically with that as a committee, and we raised that. We consistently raised that here, and we consistently raised that in P&I about that. So in a sense, but I also just want to understand what you mean by appropriate, because one of the concerns we had is it talks about a size, and if people, I just want to understand what we're talking about when we say appropriate.
let me do the broad brush strokes and then I'll pass over to the officer for the detailed numbers. I think in essence this is a strategy. Appropriate means, as most strategies, where it's defined anywhere else, that will mean what is defined within the local plan. So that's my definition of appropriate.
I don't have anything to add to that. I didn't want to repeat in here or duplicate what's elsewhere in other documents, purely because things can change every time and date. So
I do sense there's some confusion in the committee around what the open space standards are. I will ask Mark just to issue those ones again.
Thank you. Councillor Tucker?
Yes, one is a typo, if I may, on page 54. Under A, it says the council has documents in place to support delivery of this pledge. I think there should be of this pledge. Under A, what policies and strategies are in place? And then underneath there's something missing. Just a comment with regard to buildings, that has been mentioned about Buckskin on being built on appeal. We have another example. This happened in Tadley on appeal. A whole lot of houses were built on withy beds and we had nothing but problems with the Bishopswood stream for years and years with sewage going into people's homes. So it is something we have to keep our eye on. But if it's granted on appeal, there's not much we can do. And a slightly more light-hearted comment, question, whatever. There is a picture on page 53 with a chappie with his computer, and he's got his bike there as well. Now, is this what we're promoting, that people take their bikes into offices? I was just a little bit curious as to the message we were trying to give.
I think it might be a bit long for me to cycle to work every day, but I suspect some of our senior officers could do it, and maybe we should be encouraging them. And I'm now getting death inside.
Can I say, Mr. Chairman, are we supposed to take our bikes into the offices with me? That's my point.
I'm sure if there was a demand, we could look at a bike rack at the back of the council chamber.
Anything that encourages cycling that's in the remit of this borough, we should look at. Bear in mind, cycling on the M3 is not in the remit of this borough. And the M3 is a major contributor to stuff going through the borough.
It might be quicker, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions for Mark. In the report 4.2, which is page 42 of 81, so the top paragraph, there's a mention of reduced councillor mileage. Is this measured by claims on mileage?
as I understand it, yes, it is, yes.
So the claims are lower. It might not necessarily mean that the mileage is lower. Do we have scope perhaps for looking, I know we've discussed this before, but do we have scope for looking at perhaps having more teleconferences and fewer on-site meetings perhaps to actually reduce mileage?
I'm sure we do. We've got the technology to do that. So obviously the chairman's briefing takes place in that way. So happy to expand that across the council. Obviously we are in the process of just finalising have finalised the staff travel plan. So that's something that we can advocate in there as well.
Thank you, Chair. And I have another question as well. Councillor Harvey was talking about fuel poverty earlier on, and you mentioned the scheme with Hart. And I recall coming to a presentation. It was a very good presentation. I think there were 2 sessions in February. Unfortunately, there weren't very many members who turned up, and perhaps we could communicate better with our residents if perhaps more members engaged with that process and actually took that information away. And if members are really very concerned about fuel poverty, perhaps if they come, perhaps we could have got that message out.
Absolutely. If it's helpful, I can circulate the slides that were presented on the day, because as Councillor Reid says, it's really helpful if members are able to tap into their communities to help to spread the word.
Councillor Peach.
Thank you. It's just a couple of quick questions. On the first
pledge, where it says we will lead by example. I just want the clarity whether that is lead by examples at other authorities or local people and businesses. I think I got the answer earlier, but I'd just like to clarify that.
I'd rather like us to do both, but the primary aim was local businesses and the local community.
Excellent, thanks. All right, one other question. I just want, before I ask this question, I want to caveat it with actually, I do think this is a really good document and we're taking a good step in the right direction. And it's really good to see this coming forward. But I wondered if there are plans to explore more initiatives. For example, I look back at my days of living in Woking when about 5 to 10 years ago they was, putting up solar panels all over the place and that type of work. There's also looking at other energy saving sources like even nitrogen fuel cells and all sorts of things. I mean, I know they have their problems as well in terms of producing the nitrogen, but nonetheless, there was a lot of exploration about a lot of different things, and I think that kicks into where we were talking earlier. When you look at the 3 pledges is reduce emissions, reduce carbon, and then in many respects, climate change is going to happen. We can't avoid it. But perhaps if there's more things we can look at. So are there any plans, is the first part of the question, in order to explore these much wider issues? Because I wouldn't want to pin our hopes on some wind turbines or something, and perhaps there's a lot of other things we could do that perhaps are more beneficial.
In short, yes. A lot of those will come through the Green Infrastructure Fund as we develop those up. There are other plans, for instance, Mark was briefing me on the progress we're doing to put in electric charging points in some of our car parks across the town just this afternoon. Mark, I'm sure, has more as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I was just going to flag up the EPP report, which sets out some of the areas that they could potentially look at through the property investment fund that's been put forward by Kevin's team. So I think that's an area that members can have some influence, and there's certainly some exciting opportunities to explore there, including things like solar panels on roofs and energy performance contracts, combined heat and power, all manner of things that are up for grabs effectively. It's identified that these are just options at this stage, but something that's showing the direction of travel there. Thank you. And the following part of that is, and I'm sure you have, but with those authorities that have put a lot of energy into their solar panel, adding it to all sorts of buildings all over their stock, perhaps, as the question been asked, what has been the benefits of it? Because it'd be interesting to know if they've done that already. And I know they've done it for about 5 to 10 years, around that sort of mark. I know that's quite broad, but nonetheless, it might be a good indication of how much energy is it saved, how much money have local people saved by having solar panels put on their buildings, etc. I think that would be really useful to inform everybody.
There is a lot of research on that. We have a lot of that research. We certainly need to get that into a format that the council can make the decisions around where we invest our money going forward.
Councillors, we're still on paper B, the climate change one. If you look at page 41 of 81, there's item 2 is the recommendation where we're actually trying to achieve 2.1, 1, 2 and 3. If we now move into discussion mode, but please bear in mind that's where we're trying to get to. Councillor Gavin James.
Just a point of order, if I may. I had understood that you were giving other people a chance, but those who had not quite finished were going to be able to come back. Now, I promise you I won't have very much to say beyond the questions. A couple of things, yes. But I would just like clarification on a couple more issues, if I may.
I will allow that, but well, Councillor Bierman now. Carry on.
And just because I think Mr. Heath raised the very important thing about, what's going to happen, what are you going to do, how are you going to measure it, and one of the things that I'm still not quite sure about is on page 56 to 81, where we're engaging with the LEPs and the chambers. Is that, apart from writing them a letter, they're saying, please think about these things, is that engagement more solid, shall we say?
I was going to say, it's certainly something that we pick up when we can at all opportunities when officers attend LEP events. So that's the first point, effectively.
I was going to make the general point that I think Basingstoke Council's interaction with the LEP and the Chambers of Commerce is actually exceptional. We can see that from the amount of funding and projects that are coming through from the LEP, and certainly this is an area we need to continue engaging with them.
Just coming back on that point, absolutely no question that we're very committedly engaged with the LEP. It's a question of, is this topic to the fore? But okay, I've put the query down, and as I hope as a reminder, I know Mark goes to the meetings because I've actually bumped into him at one. So at least there's two of us committed on that front. Can I just also clarify, there's a reference to 4 plug-in points. Is that something that we are doing, or is that something just basically where we're saying, thank you, Hampshire?
It's a joint effort. County are introducing 2 charging points, I understand, in Churchill Way car park near to the Anvil. They've already introduced one at the Little Chef on the A303. And we're introducing one, or we're working hard to introduce one in Central Car Park, which we hope will be operational during the summer, this summer. There's been quite a few issues to contend with, but we think we're getting there with that. 2 at Churchill Way.
And one last very quickie. Garden waste sacks. I had a resident get in touch and say they've been reduced in size, and they had a rather negative take on that. A, is that correct? And B, if so, why so?
I wasn't aware they had been reduced in size. If they have, I'll come back to you, Councillor Bayman. With that, we are also looking at different options for the garden waste, which will also involve a very small garden waste bag, primarily focused on small households with small gardens, which is a positive step forward, but I will come back to you on volumetric measures.
Councillor Gavin James.
Good evening, Chairman. Hello, everyone. There's a couple of comments I want to make. The first one I only just actually noticed, which was on page 50 of 81, the second last paragraph. It says, however, climate change will not be combated just by a singe strategy. And I think we should adopt a single strategy rather than a singe strategy. But that's just a point I noticed. It's actually the box underneath that. We talk about these targets and we're just adopting the government targets. As we know, and I think it's alluded to earlier, councils like Woking have been far more proactive in getting on with this. So we are a huge local authority with a huge amount of resource and also a huge amount of opportunity. Bear in mind, some authorities are going to struggle to achieve this. I think we need to do a bit better. And I think we perhaps should look at maybe just a small amount, the 15% of energy demand from renewables by 2020, by just stretching ourselves and pushing it a little bit further. I think we should be ambitious. I'd like us to be the best in everything we do. And this is one thing where I think we've got a huge amount of potential to be the best. So I think they do need to be looked at again. I think there's limited detail on the cycling situation, and I appreciate lots that's tied up the local plan. I see no reason, certainly when I sat in the Basingview map and I mentioned where the cycle routes weren't, I was looked at rather like a zombie that I just mentioned we impose a disease on Basingview. And actually, as we're building it from scratch and they're big wide roads, it was a perfect opportunity to have the perfect cycle route all the way through it. And obviously going on beyond to Chinham Business Park. And I have a vision one day that you'll walk out of Basingstoke railway station, you'll see those bikes that you put £1 in the slot and you cycle off to work. And that might encourage more people to use public transport. Clearly, if you're going to the train, coming off the train station, you work in Chinham, it's a long way to go. But on a bike, it's not very far at all. So I think we should do a lot more and start building in as part of our strategy. I appreciate it's got a lot to do with the local plan and how developments appear over time, but we should be incorporating in our strategy that we will try and link all our major employment areas to the railway station via cycle routes and explore that actively. The next thing, when we get onto the targets, and whilst I think there's a huge amount of very good in here, and there's no doubt about that at all, I think it takes us on a long journey, I did think some of the targets were a little bit wishy-washy. Start with the actions, I should say, the actions. Explore the potential of and financial case for renewable energy installations on council property and land. And I know it talks about more than that. It talks about private commercial property. And I know we'll say we've got no control over that or no complete control. But I would prefer a different wording actively pursue, I think would be better than, explore. And certainly when we're talking about working with other agencies, you simply go along to any of our major industrial areas. I think the Parcel Force warehouse has these beautiful long sloping roofs facing south and little ones facing north, which is absolutely perfect for solar energy. Have we had a conversation with them? Why haven't we? Obviously, I've mentioned the ice rink on a regular basis, a very big roof, and the aquadrome's a very big roof, and the cinema's a very big roof. They're all over the place, and obviously in many respects they're the most efficient ways to fit the energy. A lot of because these warehouses operate during the day, use most of their energy during the day, so rather than try and look at a feed-in tariff, there's opportunities to sell direct to the user and actually provide energy, which of course, thanks to the changes brought into legislation in 2010, the local authorities are now allowed to generate energy and sell that energy. So there's nothing to stop us doing it, and we've got an awful lot of money in the bank to do it. Not enough of that in there. Talking about the switch, Hampshire, it's a fantastic thing. And I think it's buried in a climate change strategy. The reality is, if I switch from British Gas to Scottish Electric or whatever, and other electricity providers are available, I should say, I don't actually do much about climate change. I've just switched provider. And I think that's a whole massive piece of work, which is absolutely important and vital. But I'm not sure it sits in the climate change strategy. I think that needs to sit on its own as a big beacon of, we want people to switch and explore it and save energy, save prices on energy. This should be about reducing our consumption of energy and generating green energy, and not about switching provider. It's not really in the climate, I'm not sure it should be in here. I think not only does it bury that piece of good work, it also bags out the actual climate change strategy itself and adds bits that don't really need to be in there. When we get to targets, things like on page 60 of 81, and deliver a regenerated green business park at Basingview, setting examples for local businesses. And then the target, this is a long-term project over a 20-year period. So to say we're going to spend 20 years doing it doesn't really give us a sort of green target. I know you're aware we're having targets that we can't meet, but if we were to put in that 30% of all new industrial buildings in the borough will reach a BREEAM status of excellent, and that will be monitored every year, if you find you're falling below the 30% target, that's when you turn around and say, we need to relook at our planning policies. We need to change our planning policies because we're not delivering the BREEAM status of excellence, which will deliver lots of reduction in carbon emissions. And I see no reason why there's going to be some target. 30% I've picked out of the air. I'm sure an expert can give us a better guide, but there should be something in there, some realistic target where we can measure. Because I'm not sure how we measure how we're delivering a green business park over a 20-year period. How do we measure that? There's no measure there, and I think that's really quite important. Obviously, fracking is a county council issue. They are the ones who do all the mining and mineral stuff, so we're very limited, but I do think within our climate change strategy, there could be a very clear statement that this council is absolutely opposed to any fracking near it, within it, perhaps, I'd like to say within 1,000 miles of it, but I think we'll be realistic and say we will absolutely oppose and resist any temptation to frack within the borough's boundaries. And that sends a very strong and loud message to the county council that if they try it, we're going to put up a fight and we're going to be very difficult. And that should be in there, because I know it's not saying totally within our control, but it's in our control that we're going to oppose it, even if we can't actually stop it. And I think that should be in there. For the moment, that's all. The community garden sacks, I am one of those people with a small garden. It really isn't worth me paying the money to have a garden sack. Equally, I feel really stupid driving all the way to the dump where they carry a bag of grass. I'd have to keep my garden cuttings for about 5 years. In fact, how often I cut my grass, probably longer than that, before I actually made it worth driving to the dump. I don't know whether we need to look at community garden sacks in some form or fashion, so that on Monday the bags are dropped off, or on Friday the bags are dropped off, and on Monday we'll go, if we mow the grass over the weekend, fill them up. There is a risk that you'll come back on Monday and you'll find carry bags full of washing machines and tumble dryers and sofas, but it might be worth a little pilot scheme to look at community garden sacks in a more efficient way than picking up small bags. I'll leave it there for now. I may have more later.
Let me start by saying, Councillor James, if you're leaving your garden cuttings for 5 years, congratulations, you're composting them. Try putting them back on the floor beds as well, you'll find it actually works. I think you make some very good points about the introduction of Boris bikes into Basingstoke. I think a lot of people will do them. I think Boris bikes would be a fantastic thing to have, and it's certainly something we can use. I really must urge the councillor go along to those Basingview meetings and entertain Councillor Ger Wardner. You know, he will welcome your participation. I do think we need to look at Basingview and make it a green one. However, that is something that will need to come through their strategies under this one. I'm not sure I liked his language, but we must actively implement, I think is the word, around the solar plants. I think we actually need to work out, is it the right thing for the council to do before we commit ourselves to doing that? But I would agree with him, that is certainly the direction I want us to take, and that's what the evidence is looking like this. But we do need to make that formalised evidence review first. I think that was all the points that I had there.
Councillor Day, you haven't spoken yet. First of all, Mr. Chair, apologies for being late this evening. I've got a hell of an order shot. I just want to really recapture Gavin's point there about he's talking about the green cycle, green cycle bags. Sorry, confusing there. It's been a bit one of those type of days. The green waste bags, but actually, I'm just thinking out loud. A point that was made to me by a resident very recently was, and a friend actually who lives in Tansley, and we suddenly met at the tip the other week. It's a very nice place to meet, and we just started and we went into coffee and etc. etc. Afterwards. But I'm digressing here. The point I want to make, that person came from Tadley, and it's the same for Richard's folk. They say, they say, hey, we have to come all the way about 10 miles or either way to get rid of the rubbish, basically. And we've only got Wade Road. So in this policy, I didn't see anything that said, hey, we're going to have something essential for people of Whitchurch, of Tadley, and all these, and also the heavier places and all that. And even if it just would have to be the same size as Wade Road, but I think we ought to really consider that. It shouldn't just be left as hey, everybody has to drive to Wade Road. Oh, sorry, yes, of course.
As members will be aware, we are the collection authority on a curbside, but Wade Road is a county facility. They have the responsibility for the household waste recycling centres. To give them their official name, we all call them the TIP. Having said that, the county do two things which may have relevance for Tadley. First of all, is they pay neighbouring county councils to allow us to use Berkshire's, etc., and their recycling centres. So, if they want to go across the border, they can do so. They have the right to do that, and the county pays them to do that. Second thing is, we have actually been exploring across the borough for garden centres, businesses, community centres, etc., to open up communal skips for green garden waste to do it through. Now, it would seem sensible that a garden centre would like that, because if I was getting rid of my green garden waste and it was in the car park of a garden centre, I'm probably more than likely to go in and buy more of the plants that I've killed in the last year. But I can't get any of them to participate in it. So on a public plea, if anyone's out there who can do it in a way that meets health and safety regulations, we're up for it. It's in our plans and we'll do it. I'd love to be able to do it. We haven't managed to get any community groups to be able to do it in a way that meets health and safety. And you do have some health and safety things there. You can imagine unmanned skips, you can't get volunteers involved. You can imagine the complexities there. But certainly something I think is the right way forward, and we should be looking at it. But on the wider bit, I'd actually prefer the residents didn't take their green garden waste anywhere, because the best thing for green garden waste for us anything to do is copy Councillor James. Compost it at home. That's actually the best thing for the environment for any of us to do, is compost our own green garden waste. And that's what we should be promoting.
Councillor Links.
There's a point of information actually that yes, we could go across the border, but alas, West Berkshire is in Newbury, and Reading is in Reading, or just on the outskirts, and it's nearly as far to go to these other places than it is to go to our own Basingstoke and Dean, Hampshire County Council at Wade Road. So it's not that convenient, I'm afraid. Tried it, been there, done the lot. There is somewhere down at Padworth that will take certain bits of recyclable stuff. They won't take everything, and I can assure you, when you turn up there with stuff, you then have to drive all the way to somewhere like West Berkshire if you're in the area.
Councillor Day?
Just really on this is the point I'm making about Ray Road is, and Councillor Weeks now is also saying the same thing, is that will reduce significant carbon emissions if people aren't travelling from all these other places, these other villages. So I think that really should be a target in itself as we look at target carbon emissions, which, I fully support, and I think we're doing the right thing in what we've got in the report here. Can I just have a couple more? Am I allowed? I'm sorry, because I've come sort of a bit sleepy to begin with. I'm sorry, I'm just coming alive. One of the things that has always bothered me, and Councillor Stills did comment on it, is the Hampshire cycle policy, or lack of it. Because, here I am in my later years now, which is quite a shock to me in all honesty, but I hadn't cycled until for 35 years until I did some cycling in Antwerp, as I showed Councillor Bibb, and great joy that was on a bike. I didn't walk for 4 days afterwards, but that's not the point. I'm not sure if I enjoyed the experience or not. But the thing is, I haven't really seen much of a policy, and I'd like to see a policy, rather than just words written down there. I'd like to see that the government, if I'm right, or if I remember, gave quite a bit of money. I think it was 160 million, I think it was a year or two back, to say, let's have some cycle lanes. But I'm not aware that we've got any plan to have any cycle lanes. I do sometimes drive and see a painted cycle on the road, and I think, what's the point of that? I don't get it, and I don't know what Hampshire are doing. So this is no criticism of Councillor Stills or any of you here. But it's frustrating because I don't see, it's just like it's a word without anything doing. Much ado about nothing, to quote Shakespeare. Right, that was a bit posh, isn't it? And finally, I just want to stop with cycling. It's about the reduction of people coming to work in their cars. I hope we're not going to take a bullying attitude here, because at the end of the day, how many of you came tonight with a friend here? Come on, there's enough of us here. Did anybody drive alone or come with a friend? Anybody?
I've got no friends.
You've got nobody, no mates.
My wife.
Your wife can't, well, yeah, she can go, yeah. So there's two, okay, Gavin walked, Martin got bought by his own. So it's quite a difficult policy to achieve, and I think it's okay stating it down there, but I feel pretty aggrieved if I was a council employee, and you're going to say to me, well, we're not going to give you parking space, we're not going to do this, you have to find, a way of sharing a car. I don't think that's the right approach. I know you haven't said what the approach is, but I just get the impression, well, how are you going to do it? Because nobody in the Basingstoke Borough is going to suddenly say, oh, right, I'm going to go knock on my friend's door and see if he wants to go to work with me today. Because it just doesn't work like that. I prefer to catch the bus, but it's just not convenient sometimes. And, I've got to go and get home tonight. We can get home if we leave within the hour. and that's the truth of the matter, So some of these, I think there's no criticism of what you've done here. It's fabulous. But they just strike me, sometimes it's just words without necessarily committing a real backbone. That's all, Councillor Marks. Mr. Chair. Sorry.
I'll ask Councillor Denard to respond, but there is definitely work on what you're talking about going on.
I agree with what you said, Councillor Day. I was very sorry to hear that you couldn't sit to walk for 4 days after cycling. But I know the county are doing a lot of work on cycling. We certainly need. I know we've enabled County Councillor here will feed back the views of the committee through to them. And absolutely not, we're not going to be a Stalinistic borough and take away all the car parking spaces of borough officers or anything like that. It's not going to be forcing. We need to work together with them to bring this through.
Mark, did you want to add anything?
I can just add a couple of details to some of the carrots that we use at the council in terms of encouraging people to travel by non-car modes. We provide car sharing spaces in the forecourt, the forecourt of Eastland, so that little car show don't have to walk quite as far. So there's that to start with. I'm not sure how much of an incentive it is, but I'm sure it encourages some. We've got a couple of pool bikes that we've recently serviced, and they're available to all staff to use. There's a booking system online. We've got 3 pool cars, and we're looking to acquire an electric vehicle in replacement for one of these. And we have just launched discounted rail ticket for staff travelling certain journeys. So we're trying to get there with those kind of things.
I believe Councillor Harvey wanted to come back.
Thank you. Just a few points to make. One of my colleagues, a friend of mine in London, managed to use the scheme to buy a bike. managed to fall off it the very first time he got on it using the scheme, the tax-back scheme, and break his collarbone in doing so. So the safety of cyclists is important, and that leads me on to my serious point about the cyclists. We think that there should be a SPD specifically for cycling in the borough. We really do believe that, and that would give us an opportunity to link all of the main policy areas into one piece of work that gives us the strategy for cycling in the borough that we do need. Franking all the points that have been made in regard to that area, I completely agree with you. I was listening to Gavin and Stephen saying I agree with you both really what your direction of travel is on this. Like the idea of bob bikes, can we call them bob bikes? Forgive me, Robert. Boris bikes, bob bikes, does that work? Appropriate. As in Roberts. I'm trying to find a B that works with your name, Roberts. I was trying to find a B that worked with your name. That's appropriate. Seriously, I think one of the issues I think I have with this is I think we disagree on what a strategy is. I know you talked about ethos, but for me, it's not a wish list. It's something more than that. Now, there is much to be welcomed. However, it does need to look more widely as a strategy at achieving a reduction in carbon emissions across the whole borough and set specific actions and measurable targets so that members of the community will be able to see themselves what progress they've made. Now, I appreciate that isn't necessarily the direction of travel you've set out tonight, but I actually agree with Maria Miller on that point, which is an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah. That's our MP telling us to have borough-wide targets. That's our MP telling us that we should have the ability for the community to see themselves in the progress they've made. So I actually, for once, agree with Maria on that. In terms of fuel poverty, I agree with Gavin's point. It's one of those issues of where do you put this issue? It does link to the insulation. It does link to the other elements of a wider policy that adds up together. But the issue for fuel poverty, and in terms of what I'm seeing it, it's how do we get the affordable options? It ain't as simple simply to swap amongst the various energy suppliers. It's what do we do as a council to offer cheaper and more affordable options for people to access so that they can actually afford to heat their homes and not have to choose between putting food or fuel. But that conscience of linking to insulation and linking to all the other programmes, and again that comes back to the Building Homes for Life standards, because what is the quality of the building we're seeing taking place in the borough? So yes, all of these things interlinked. It's really important. The issue of public transport, what do we want to see the £6 to £8 million, and it's going to be reduced by 32% by the county, even though they're going through consultation. I would be very, very shocked if they don't reduce it by 32%. It's very rare for the county to come out with a consultation they don't then follow through the threat of, and we know that from experience in other consultations. In the context of that, where does that £6 to £8 million of public subsidy across both this council and the county deliver a public transport service not only that residents want to get from A to B, but actually improves in terms of climate change, that gives us that ability to do it? And you're right, at the moment, Stagecoach are not that partner. And I would question, how do we achieve a better partnership, either with them or with somebody that may achieve what we need on that front? How do we get that piece of policy to be reality? And finally, Chair, in relation to the flooding aspect, we shouldn't run away from the point that was made right at the start by the public speakers talking about the threat of climate change and what it genuinely means for people. And for the very first time, I think, in our borough, we have had very direct experience of residents in the heart of the town, let alone just the rural areas, experiencing what climate change and what the threat of that means to their lives. And we shouldn't escape that. And I agree with the comments about our staff completely there on that. But if anything, just here, the final point is to capture and understand, not just to empathise, but to do something about it in relation to those residents because of everything they've been through. And I'm absolutely sure we all share that sentiment sat around the table. And it might not fit into the climate change strategy, but feeling like it's got to fit somewhere. It has got to fit somewhere. So I do hope we'll see something coming forward on that in the right way very, very soon.
Councillor Donnell.
Totally agree about the flooding, and I think the leader has shown over the last period his absolute dedication to those people who have been suffering the flooding, and his absolute dedication and the way he has held to account the water companies, etc., in public to achieving the best goal for them, to which he's actually been very ably supported by the officer cadre. I do believe we have a huge amount of work to do in public transport, work in cooperation and conjunction with the County Council, and I know that work is being led by Councillor Osselton and is coming through. And again, the climate change, as I said at the start, is one of those things that could delve into absolutely everything. But that work plan and that workflow around the public transport has been identified, and I think we all really need to engage in there. Finally, I doubt they'll be called Bob's Bikes, as this is my last council meeting. Perhaps there'll be Clive Cycles.
Councillor James.
For point of order, I know Councillor Sanders' views on bicycles, and I think it's a very inappropriate name.
Yeah, may I just add, in terms of the car sharing, I look forward to the day when Councillor Sanders and Councillor Isaac are sharing a tandem coming in from East Wooding and Birdcliff.
That would be worth a photograph. Councillors, can I remind you of the recommendation? 1 and 2, I believe you've already done. Sorry, I'm being reminded I did agree Councillor Beerman could come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, because I did have some comments as opposed to just questions. And I do want to acknowledge that as a member of the Climate Change Panel, I've had an opportunity to input to this, though I've obviously not previously seen the final draft. And I fear I do have to slightly deviate from the officer's conclusion that it's short and snappy. I can claim that I said of the previous edition I didn't think it was snappy enough, and I think we've a little way to go, but I'll leave it at that. Can I agree, in particular, can I agree with Gavin on, I think, everything he said? Well, tough I'm going to. And I'll agree with most of what Councillor Day said, apart from his last bit. And I have to say, I think there is a place for a certain level of constructive coercion. And in part, we are doing some coercion because I believe I'm right in saying that all members have access to a car share website where if somebody is coming from somewhere and wants to share, and in fact, I think your previous manager has made use of it extensively, Andrew Hunter, in sharing lifts by just going on, and he said not only has he shared a few lifts, he's made a few friends in the process. So there are mechanisms, and if there's that extra little bit of incentive, it just makes people perhaps take a step that they otherwise wouldn't have made. So with all due respect, I'm going to deviate slightly from what you said, Councillor Day, on that one. I'm just want to endorse the fracking thing. It had crossed my mind, fracking that specifically, but I felt that might be just a bit too radical to take through this committee. But if we can put it forward as part of our decision at the end of this debate, I would welcome it, along with the amended wording that you suggested earlier, Councillor James. I'd like to say, just in terms of the question of Councillor Donnell's observation about the Basing View meetings, it is great, and I'll certainly take him up on that offer. Had I not had slight distractions, I might well have been at the last one myself, and I'd made the 7 into 14 minutes or something. But my issue is really, if we don't get these things right, exactly what was said earlier about the routes through now, introducing these things retrospectively is almost impossible and massively expensive, and they'll never be as good. If we get these things right at the start, when it's relatively cheap and they're part of the programme, brilliant. That's again why I'm so much endorsing what was said by Councillor James. And I just come back briefly to the anaerobic digestion that was raised by Sheila earlier. That is, again, it is a case, we have all this problem about the sewage. That's a big talking point from just about anywhere, because we in Chinham certainly don't want it in what is wrongly labelled our sewage works. But the stuff shouldn't be being transported miles across the town, should it? And it comes back to what is in our local plan and all the rest of it. That's where these things need to be quite clearly stated, and I do hope we can move in that direction as well. But I would, as I say, I'd like to second such amendments as Councillor James seemed to be proposing earlier. Thank you.
Councillors, I believe we've done 2.1.1 and 2, but 2.1.3, which is about the Green Investment Fund, would appreciate a few comments, how people feel about that, because that is in the recommendation here. Or we could go to EPP where it's come up anyway. Councillor Gavin James.
I just want to start by thanking Councillor Bierman, and because he was so nice to me, I should mention that public transport in the borough will be absolutely massively boosted if we have a railway station in Chinham, which I'd completely support. I think, to be honest, provides comments on the future use of the Green Investment Fund. I'm not sure we want to be setting strict usage. As long as it's an investment that is a return, an acceptable return to the Borough Council, and we've got lots of rules, and if not, we have officers who tell us what the rules are. And it reduces the impact of climate. It tackles climate change either by reducing emissions, reducing energy use, or creates green energy. I don't think we should need to restrict it. It's going to go to EPP. I sit on that. I'll have my say then. But I don't think it should be some really tight thing that we kind of say, oh, it must be this, and it's got to tick boxes. We should be open and be, earlier on Councillor Peach mentioned, sort of nitrogen and things like that. There's so much technology emerging. There's so much out there we don't actually know yet, and I'd hate us to restrict it. If someone knocks on the door and says, I've got a great idea that's going to reduce your carbon emissions and make you lots of money, I think we should listen to them. What we might need is a bit more money.
And that's the portfolio holders nodding. Councillors, can we please move?
Just ask a brief question in connection with that. When it goes to EPP, will this changing of the direction, i.e. not necessarily just having the Green Investment Fund be for profit, but whatever the words were that I think I played a part in creating, whether that can be part of what goes to EPP or whether it already is, because I do think that's an important potential change.
The portfolio holder to answer that.
We're certainly not constituted here tonight to do a change of direction around what a capital fund and investment fund is for. That is going to consultation at EPP. That is the body that will consult back to it. I will I'll ask the chairman and the officers to make the chairman of EPP aware of the discussions we've had tonight, suggest that the members listen to this webcast or at least read the minutes. I think that would be a valid thing for them to do going forward. But that discussion will be had at EPP, but I have to say I do agree with Councillor James around the let's not tie our hands and be too prescriptive about this fund. If it makes the council an acceptable return and it has a positive impact for the environment, those are the two restrictions I'd want on it and not a lot else.
Councillor Still.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a point of, I'm just going to give you some information if that's okay. It's not a point of information, I just want to give you information. Because fracking's been mentioned quite a lot here this evening, and I'm sorry that lady's disappeared. Okay, well, in Hampshire over the last year or so, there's been an awful lot of interest in, the fracking and the shale gas and what. So basically, if you don't mind me reading it off here, because I've been making notes, but it's easier for me to read it off my computer. And I'm not sure you may be aware, but Hampshire County Council will be holding an event soon, sometime in June. I think it's the 5th of June, on fracking. So they're going to be inviting lots of different communities, and there's going to be a one-day event for communities to come forward, parish councils and so on, and there'll be lots of guest speakers there just to air this whole thing about fracking. So we are taking it extremely seriously at Hampshire County Council, and I can actually give you the date. It's being planned for the 5th of June, and it's intended that the event will include presentations for a variety of speakers, Environment Agency, Health and Safety, Hampshire County Council officers, interested communities who will have invitations and so on. And I think it's going to be a really good day. So hopefully, if there's anybody here tonight who wants more information, I can give it to you offline, so I won't keep going on and on and on. Okay. But fracking is very much on the agenda, and the seriousness of it at Hampshire County Council, and how we deal with it.
Thank you. Did you want to say where it'll be?
It'll be held in Winchester.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
So it was just an additional question to that, to Councillor Steele. Are you able to email us round with actual details of when and where and so on? So, yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I believe there's enough interest in this committee. If you could actually put to all this committee, all councillors, when it is sorted out, with a positive date. Right, can we please look at page 41 of 81, top left, recommendation. Recommended that this committee notes the progress achieved to date, which we've done, provides comments on the content of the updated, which we've done, and we just recently just touched on the future of the green infrastructure. Are we all happy with that paper? Agreed. Thank you very much. In which case, we move on from paper C. The portfolio holder would like to do a clarification.
Just to say, if you have any detailed comments around the targets or anything else, please do feed them through to myself and Mark, and we're welcome to take anything through because this still needs to go in front of Cabinet. And lastly, on a personal one, I'd like to thank everybody on this committee. I think I joined it the first time I became a councillor, chaired it for a long number of years, and thank you for all. It's been fun working with you at times, and some of you, and other times it's been painful working with some of you at times of you, and that goes across all parties for both.
Councillors, do we wish to have a 5-minute breather before we move to paper B? We do. Could you those who prefer a 5-minute breather, please raise their hands. Could we have 5 minutes, please? Meet back here before past, preferably 25 past. Councillors, wherever you are, can we come back and sit down, please? Right, welcome back to the Housing Ofcom Committee. We're now moving on to paper B, which is the Sentinel Housing Association Government's Arrangements. We have Mike Shepherd from Sentinel sitting over here. Thank you very much for being patient for the first paper. He is the skilled man on this. I hope, I don't know how much input into the paper, but anyway, it's your paper. So, for starters, I don't know whether you wish to start or our officers.
I'll do a short introduction.
Right, our officer will do a short introduction and then we'll hand over to you.
Good evening, members. You'll be pleased to know it is a very short introduction. The report before you sets out some recent decisions that Sentinel have made in terms of their governance arrangements, which include restructuring their board. The issue before us tonight is one of the Observer Board member status that we currently hold, and a request from Sentinel as part of those arrangements for us to relinquish that right. I'm not going to say any more. Myself and Mike are happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Would you like to go through the basics of it? I'm making a big assumption that all around the table have read it. So there's, in which case, does anybody wish to go through the basics or go straight into questioning? Hopefully all the councillors have read it, so in which case I'll ask you to just do a very quick brief introduction and then we know who you are.
Thank you. I guess perhaps I'll start with an apology. Mark Perry, our Chief Executive, was intending to be here tonight, but unfortunately was kind of called away at short notice, so hence I get the pleasure. Thank you for the invite. I think the paper actually provides a very good summary of the proposed changes that we're looking to make to our governance. Overall, I guess the key points are that we're proposing an overall reduction in the numbers of people at our board, but driving out a stronger skill and a stronger representation through those people, and more of an equality of roles within the board member makeup that we have. That does include the proposal for the removal of the local authority observer, and the paper also covers our new resident engagement structure. That's received quite wide praise from the residents and the customers that we've had contact with. But yeah, I'm happy to take any questions on the reports.
Could we have an indication of those who wish to ask questions, please? Councillor James. Councillor Bierman. Is that it so far? Councillor James, please start on.
Thank you. I suppose my first question is to Tracy. I mean, if you look at in Appendix 2, the copy of the board papers from Sentinel, you'll see that the board papers are dated the 18th of December. And if you flick over the 2 or 3 pages to the last page on the board papers, which is, you've got page 5 of 5 at the bottom, you will see that the very last line says to implement the structure by April 2004, I suppose, 14, sorry. Why has it taken so long to get here, and has it, and we're into April now, has it been implemented, is the question.
No, it hasn't been implemented, and the reason it took so long to get here was other work pressures prevented the report being prepared in time for the deadline on the February or March committee. I can't remember which one it was.
Question to Mike is, the member that's on Sentinel is an observer that has no voting rights. Why would you want to reduce that person? Why would you want to do that?
I think Mark sets a lot of that out in his letter, which is one of the appendices here. I think we feel that a lot of our kind of joint working and the close good working that we do together doesn't necessarily come through that observer route. That's the discussions between, kind of officers and senior personnel within both organisations, and therefore it's felt that in terms of the debate and the discussion at the board, actually the removal of the of the local authority observer may actually benefit that wider discussion.
But the observer isn't a member of the personnel, it's an elected member. So it's quite different in relation to the relationship you have with members. And I can't understand why you want to do it. It's one member coming along, they don't receive allowances, they have no voting rights. Maybe we could look at how we can improve that communication with that member to other members, but why? I just don't understand the logic around that.
I guess it's kind of double-edged to a way, isn't it? There's also then an argument about what the benefit of that role is to both organisations, and if that's one of visibility, one of scrutiny, then I feel that we kind of deal with that through the senior officer relationships that we have and our day-to-day dealings with other councillors and other members that we interact with. You are right; it is an observer, so the role does observe the meetings, but as you say, there are no voting rights, so it's difficult to perhaps influence the direction of service or of governance.
I was one of those observers that sat on the Sentinel, and I've tried ever since to get back on, but was never actually achieved that. But very rarely does Sentinel actually have a vote. But I very much influenced the agenda of Sentinel as an observer, and I believe I was very effective in that role, and I then communicated back to the housing department and to housing and to other members what was going on in Sentinel. And I think it's an incredibly effective role, and I still don't understand why there is a need to do that. We may need to, as part of the work that we're doing, or maybe through the Constitutional Working Party, look at how we can improve that relationship with the observer, with the rest of the council. But you talk about meeting with senior members of staff. I just think that I still don't quite understand the importance of doing this.
Yeah, I don't have a great deal to add really to what's in the paper or what we've just said, but primarily it's around having a kind of a smaller board with kind of more interaction from the members then of that board with the voting rights.
Councillor Beerman.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the same experience as Councillor James of having participated in the board. I did go to some previous briefing sessions. Sentinel were quite good in the early days and in their previous incarnation in having, I think it was certainly half yearly, if not quarterly, member briefing sessions. And I see Councillor Weeks nodding his head because he and I have shared a table there and so on. And I found them quite enlightening. And though I well understand that through the evolution of Sentinel through the various phases and amalgamations, that the whole setup and management can have become a bit cumbersome, and I'm just a bit fearful that though the theory of these regular meetings with council officers and so on provide a useful working channel, of course the time can come when individual staff members on both sides change and these things start to sort of fade, and I've been in similar situations where in the end they've just died because there hasn't been the driving force to make sure that they're mentioned. They come about. People think, oh well, Jim is speaking with Mary and so there is some interchange and everything's fine. Add to that, in the paper somewhere it says appropriate minutes will be shared with the borough. I'm not sure, board minutes. I would have thought that the board minutes were always in perhaps not the public domain, but certainly in the domain of interested parties, almost irrespective of what was on them, unless, of course, it's personal stuff or strictly confidential in terms of, say, investments or something. But I would have liked to have thought that the minutes were there as a default position, and it was only in exceptional circumstances that the minutes, or part thereof, were removed from sharing. So to me, it's a bit too much to, oh, well, we'll let you have the minutes when we feel like it. That's a bit of poetic exaggeration, but that's the way it seems to drift. So I don't necessarily share the misgivings quite as strongly as Councillor James, but I can see where she's coming from, and I certainly I'm a little uncertain that the robustness for continued liaison is there, particularly in view of the loss of the member engagement. And I suspect one of the reasons that they drifted a little was that the attendance wasn't massive. But I think those that attended took part very wholesomely and wholeheartedly. So, if that's gone, we're drifting away from proper interchange and I was losing the word, it's probably the hour, proper cross-fertilisation is the word I'm looking for, by going this way quite as vigorously as you're suggesting. And I have read what was said.
I think in terms of the minutes, you're right. We kind of communicate everything in there, bar any kind of investment decisions. That's what's meant by appropriate. It's probably clumsy wording in terms of this report, but it is a kind of full set of the minutes and of the discussion, but with the kind of financial investment scenarios redacted, not necessarily accounts. They become public, and those would continue to be replicated within the minutes that were issued. So it is only investment matters that would be taken out of that. I think coming on to the other points about the kind of strategic engagement, I don't think it's right that it is the case that it's kind of Officer A talks to Officer B in Sentinel. This is very much a structure between the two organisations. So chief exec to chief exec, through the directors and then through the kind of operational teams as well. So it's not just based on existing relationships that we may have with between staff members. It is much more of a corporate approach to those relationships.
I think the officer would like to come in.
Yes, I just wanted to add that there are various levels of liaison, and your references are more perhaps to the operational liaison. The strategic liaison does include the cabinet members as well, so it's not just officers.
Thank you, that's helpful. I think I don't want to dwell on it further other than to say if it's felt by members that the liaison isn't as strong and as fulfilling and as complete as it might be, you would not be surprised if we come back and try to slap wrists and say, come on, this is not in the spirit of this paper, because this paper is not a legal agreement. It is, right, this is the way we're going to work together. But I'd like to think that it has some strength about it, so that if we feel it's not working, it will be accepted that we'll come back and say, oh, you're not playing the game.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Mike, I think you're in one of the best positions in some ways with your past history to sit in the middle of this, really, and have, I guess, a view perhaps from both perspectives. Picking up the comments that have been passed so far, what I find difficult to get my head round is, on the one hand, you've got your strategic role that you're talking about. We're not talking about operational. We're not talking about detailed stuff that ward members would raise with you and ward member liaison. What we're talking about here is the operation of the board at that level and what it does, and what a member of this council, who is a representative on that body, without voting rights, yes, but what they can bring to the party. Not as an executive member, not at that level, but as somebody who is quite, in a sense, able to bring a different perspective, particularly to the board. So what I still can't find out, and it's reflected in Roger's email in here, and Councillor Gardner's email, is where does that fit? Because on page 2 of 5 of the letter that we've got, and this was the bit that disturbed me somewhat, there didn't seem to be any value being added by having local authority observers. So what's gone wrong where did that comment come from in that sense of what's gone wrong? Because for me, in the past experience, that contribution has been very valuable, particularly to the rest of us historically. So is it something that you could point at least to give me some better understanding, but also just what's changed? Because I do see a very significant change in attitude and approach, and that worries me.
I mean, it's not an issue around kind of personnel, the members that have been attending the board, and I think certainly the interaction that we've had from the councillors who have attended, as you say, in certain areas has been very strong. I think part of this is the evolution of our business as well, and as much as that Basingstoke is now kind of one of the areas which we operate in, and so a lot of the decisions that are being taken actually affect quite a wide geographic area, and I think that's perhaps where it's felt that sometimes the kind of specific focus on certain areas has perhaps stifled or narrowed some of the debate. But it's, reassure kind of members here, it's not a personal criticism of any member who sat on the board either currently or in the past.
Can I just, that certainly is not intended as a point. I think it's the bigger point, the value of whatever that person is or whoever that person is and what they bring to it. I think there's a question there in relationship to where you're going with your business and what you're becoming as a housing association. That's a much bigger question in the way that housing associations and RPs and RSLs and all the various acronyms we like to use, the way you're changing and the nature of your business. And that's a different debate for a different time, but it reflects on this simply because of what you're asking for. And for me, understanding the point that you mean there didn't seem to add value as being a local authority that compared to what I know it has been in the past, and then what that means for us strategically in the context of quite a lot of things that relate to services you deliver, not just the housing, and the input, not just that Laura, but others made, going way, way back, made to that board, not to sitting around a table and having a vision debate about where the executive member may want to take policy with you, not a debate about residents and having a residents forum or a community group. I agree with all of that, but the direct influence that a member of this council sitting on your board at that time that papers are debated, those key papers, because obviously that's what your board does, and the influence and the expertise, if you like, or the quality that person can bring simply because of who they are and what they are and who they represent to that board at that moment in time. So I've got that there, and then I've got your statement here in the letter that says not any value being added, and I can't square that. I just can't square it.
Yeah, I mean, that comment came out of an independent review of our governance and of our board arrangements that was undertaken by Board Alpha, as Mark says in the letter. I mean, primarily, as I say, their guidance to us has been around getting a smaller, more defined board, and hence that's, I guess, led to those points that have been brought out.
Councillor Gavin Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I know, looking at how young I am, you'd be shocked to remember. I can remember the fact that when council houses went to housing associations, one of the big reasons sold to us for the whole plan was that councils were too remote, they were too big, they held too many properties, there was a big distance between those running council houses and those who lived in them, and now we have these small housing associations over time have merged and become bigger than the council ever was, which does scare me a little bit. I must admit I've not had any feedback from the Observer, and I'm not entirely sure their role is the most effective way of making sure that the borough, us as elected representatives who have central residents, not always in our wards, but certainly in neighbouring wards, to connect with Sentinel. But you are a very, very major and very important social housing provider in the borough. And there doesn't seem enough, to me, of a connection between us. We have a responsibility, and I think certainly with welfare changes, we'd like to understand the impact of those and get overall figures and be able to scrutinise them, look at how many people have asked to move house or downsize, how many have been able to downsize, all those kind of things, as well as the operational issues, the complaints you get. Not specific individual complaints, but I think there must be some public scrutiny of a large housing provider within the borough. And that's not afforded anywhere within this document. So I think there needs to be some replacement. If we are losing an Observer, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't, because I think that maybe it doesn't achieve what we want to achieve, what's the replacement? And would Sentinel be prepared, if it was the will of this committee or this council, or the portfolio holder, whoever makes these decisions, to appear twice a year or once a year to give feedback, an annual report, turning up as you are now, giving us the annual report a week in advance, 2 weeks in advance to have a look through, and then challenge what's in there and ask questions and understand what progress you're making and what you're achieving as a housing association, how your residents feel you're doing, and that kind of feedback, so then we can look at how we feel it's going. Because I think we have to be seen to be looking at, we are the housing providers that send you the people, we're managing the housing list, we need to understand how that's working, and at the moment there's no allowance, it's you and officers talking. I want me as a public representative to actually in public ask those questions and see where we're going. Is that something that Sentinel would be prepared to offer the council? The quick answer is yes. I mean, in essence, that's a role that we undertake with a number of other partner local authorities, whereby we will turn up at either, a kind of an invited meeting to go through the new homes that we've developed in the area within the year, or, as you say, consensus on general complaints, feedback, welfare reform, or kind of a few issues that spring to mind. I think in terms of that scrutiny from the kind of elected representatives, our view is that through this structure that would happen much more at the liaison meetings that are in there regular as well. So there are 2 members, I believe, Tracy, invited to, 2 cabinet members that are invited to those meetings. So again, there's a possibility of an opportunity there to raise complaints through. Obviously, the cabinet tends to be, at the moment, it's a single party cabinet, and obviously it's a party that is very much rural area based, and a lot of the cabinet members are as well. And I think only by coming to an all party committee like this do you get feedback from the variety of views. You have people that represent areas where there's a lot of Sentinel housing and a lot of issues that they deal with on a daily basis, as well as those more remote locations you have. So I think it's got to be an all party. I don't think liaison with 2 portfolio holders who may not necessarily fully understand some of the larger estates and some of the issues in the larger estates that other councillors will face on a daily basis. So I think an all-party committee really has to be where it's at. I'm not sure if 2 portfolio holders is enough, broad enough, especially we've got 4 or 5 parties, including independents. We've got various, different views and opinions. In fact, one independent's usually got 2 or 3 views of his own and argues with himself constantly. But that's enough about Mr. Tilbury. So I think it has to come to an all-party committee, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at. And I wouldn't be keen to lose an observer unless we had an assurance that that's where we're going. Yeah, and I think, they'd quite happily give that assurance in terms of, our kind of ongoing engagement. Whether that needs to be formally constituted, I'm not sure, but yes, certainly, happy to give our, our acceptance to a meet. Yeah, that's it, to a meeting of that type.
Sorry, can I just add to that? I think Mike did cover the point that where we've had specific topical issues like affordable housing delivery, welfare reform, when we've run workshops, our key partners have always been invited to give their perspective and feedback. So this could be quite a natural extension of that, a twice yearly report to committee on progress on key topics and their performance across the board. I would welcome that too.
It could be to a particular meeting like this, or it could be a genuine invite to the council chamber and you're a speaker. Because I am aware, I don't wish to put in stone to a particular committee if we're looking at changing committees. But it's on webcast that Sentinel's happy to come once or twice a year and do a general report and answer questions. Yep. Thank you. Right, Councillor Peach.
Yeah, I was basically from Councillor today. I think you hit the nail on the head, really. I mean, personally, I don't see a major issue with removing the member from the board. I think that would give us some assurance if we had something like a yearly annual update so we could all feed into it and see how things are going and how it was working. But I think what we've got to accept is that, yes, we do have that tight-knit relationship, but I think at the same token, by virtue of, we manage the housing register, you're the housing provider, there's dialogue going on all the time. It's not something that just disappears because an observer has come off of the board meeting. I mean, that those conversations happen. That relationship is intrinsic. One relies upon the other and vice versa. So I just feel that this proposal is going to offer, from my mind, suitable input from the council. And not only that, this feels like it actually is going to be generated in more of a strategic consultation, whereas obviously if we're in a board meeting, I accept that there's going to be all the manner of things discussed, and whether you need someone from, you know, one of us councillors sort of watching over and just seeing how things are going and perhaps interjecting where needed. It feels like this is a better forum for that than our board meeting. I know I've versed from a question that was asked, but it was a good question, and I just thought I'd make my comments while we're on it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs James.
Thank you. It's not a gift to relinquish this, and it can't go forward unless we as a council relinquish this. It's a legal requirement as part of the LSVT. Once it's gone, it's gone. And it may be that you're not happy with the structure you've got in relation to the member sitting there. But I think there's things that we can do to improve that. That member gets confidential papers, sits through those meetings, and can sit on all manner of other meetings and policy meetings. But I'm not sure, because looking at this, they're not offering any relationship with members, no formal relationship with members. And if you do want to relinquish this, you then have to formally request, it's not that you say we'd like you, it has to be quite a formal. And we had Sovereign come along and do the same thing, a few years ago, and that relationship has drifted in relation to members. And I think that we need to possibly hold on to that board member and look at how we can ensure that there is added value. We have 2 cabinet members that meet in relation to the liaison meetings. Do we have any feedback from those cabinet members in relation to what's going on with Sentinel? I haven't had any feedback from the cabinet as to what they're discussing with Sentinel at that level. I want a formal process, and I think that it would be great as a partner that Sentinel did come along, and I wouldn't want it to be yearly. I'd like them to come along much more often than that for us to ask questions. I mean, they're a partner that we invest in, and we give them considerable money, and we work with them on lots of projects. So it would be good for them to come along, but that's additional. I think that what we need is to have a member on the board that shares, and we can feed in concerns that we have as members, and it's a relationship that we can develop. Maybe the Constitutional Working Party can look at how we can develop that relationship so it is more valuable to Sentinel and to ourselves. But once we lose that position, it's gone for good, and I don't think that we should be losing it, and I think we need to look at how we can improve it. But I also am concerned in the paper that we're being presented, there is no formal relationship in here with members, and it will be gone. And I think particularly in lots of the concerns that we have with residents at the moment, and lots of the work that's going on, we need to develop a much more formal process.
Thank you. Councillor Tucker.
In fact, my original question or comment has been covered, at least I think, well enough, and I just wondered if we could, on the recommendation 2.2, we could put in something about Sentinel coming to us and presentations, because then I think, we'll be a lot happier.
Would you be happy with that?
Would be great.
Yeah, I think, that's...
Because we are webcast, I think it's sort of agreed, but if the committee would be happy with it actually written in.
Recommendations, yeah.
Right.
Cover that when you get to the recommendation.
Okay, when we get to 2.2, we will actually put something in there regarding that. Right. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. It's just very, very briefly, really. I can understand Councillor James's concerns about losing contact with Sentinel, but I think we're covered, really. I think we have good partnership working anyway with Sentinel, and if we are going to do, as you said, as suggested by Councillor Gavin James, and we set up not a formal, regular meeting, but some kind of form of words whereby you do come, you're happy to engage with members, members can raise questions, discuss things with you. And I think we've captured really everything that the Observer is able to do, but we're able to do it across the committee, whichever committee you come to. So more members actually have access than just one observer who may or may not report those thoughts and those discussions back. So I think that actually that taking it that way is an improvement, in my opinion.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. If I could make a couple of comments. If you go back to when we had the housing associations established, then I do agree with the comments about the scale and the way they've grown and the way they've changed. I understand all of that. We all do, I think, in the context of what you've become. But we had 3 reps then, 1 from each party. And, you know, there was an issue then of representation because one of the groups on the council was left out of that. But the point being that we then went down to 1. And the issue with the relationship is that it's on many levels. You know, Sentinel wants to have a cooperative relationship. Thank you. Sentinel wants to have a cooperative relationship. It wants to have a partnership approach. Everyone endorses that. So that needs to be strong on many levels. You know, as a ward member, I want it to be strong on a daily level when I ring with the casework. I want it to be strong on an issue-based, ward-wise level when I sit down with Sentinel and the 3 of us do on various issues in order to talk about them. It's not just us, but others as well. But the issues that we raise with, and you, Mike, in particular, in terms of your role, you know that. And it's the relationship that is strategic. Now, all right, there is an executive role there because of the way we now have our system. But that member who sits on the board at the time those papers are debated can do things and influence things, and whether it's one member or not is not the issue. It's the point that this council has that position on the board to make very important contributions, I think, at that moment. And were we to lose that connection at that level, I think that undermines us in our relationship. Because, yeah, we can argue that, you know, the benefits of scale in terms of your operation is all there. We know that. The bigger you are, the money aspect of that, the organisational aspect of that's fine. But from a relationship point of view, I think it would be very fundamental change from where you were and what you were as a housing association to where you may be going in the future. And I don't like that. I really don't, personally. My view is where housing associations could be going in that respect. You're not a developer. You know, that's not what Sentinel is about, nor any of the others. You're a very particular kind of organisation because of where you've come from. And your link to us is so important because of what we are together. Now that, as I say, happens on many levels. And I agree with Gavin, and I've got no issue with having Scrutiny. I've got no issue with what Terry just said in terms of having a meeting where you come maybe twice a year but that isn't what goes on in your board meetings. There is so much quality of crucial importance in that board meeting where you're discussing papers that are directly influencing the lives of our residents, that our involvement there through a member. And it doesn't matter whether the members has done or hasn't done, or whether they've not reported back or haven't reported back. This is the position that we're talking about, not the individual that's held it. It's the position we're talking about and how we might want to choose to use it to the benefit of everybody in the future. To lose that now by giving up the right to it, I think is wrong. I think it's right to say, look, we'd like to work with you on this to have a better way of our relationship working. But at that board meeting, this council's representation at your board to us is important. And then it's wrapped up with everything else that goes with it. Because I don't disagree with what's been said. All I'm saying is that board relationship is so crucial, because I've seen it over the 13 years of being so crucial, let alone that everybody else has told me about it before then at Oak Firm, going way, way back to the LSVT in 95. It would be a shame to break that, it really would. And I would hope you might go away from this meeting at least to think about that again, because I don't want us to take the decision. We may do that tonight, you may vote for that tonight, I understand that. But I would hate for us to break that relationship, I really, really would. And once it's gone, we can't repair it, because I personally don't have confidence, in all honesty, you're going to give us it back if we wanted it. And that's a shame, that's a real shame. So I don't want us to take the decision tonight. I'd like to ask Sentinel to go back and think about it again on the basis of the quite meaningful relationship that we do want with you, but as Councillor Gavin James has said in terms of the scrutiny, and others have said, can be, but also the way that we can be part of your board. And it's that being part of your board that I'm hanging on to as being important.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. I mean, I guess, yeah, in essence, there are kind of two quite distinct recommendations really as part of this paper. And one is the wider changes to our board as a whole in terms of reducing the number of board members there, which I haven't kind of picked up any opposition to, but we can perhaps come back to that if there is. And then I guess there's a separate issue of the observer role. And I think we'd be quite happy almost to disengage the two, perhaps, if there is an acceptance of the overall changes to the board. And maybe it is that the observer role is one that we, if it is felt to be that, that valuable to the council, we disengage that from the wider governance changes and, kind of have perhaps the approval for the wider board structure tonight with a view that we will come back at a future point, perhaps having worked with officers and members around what the observer role actually does, so almost a kind of two-part recommendation.
Councillor Beerman, I just wanted to say, can I suggest therefore we have a separate vote to facilitate just that? I'll clarify from the chair what I believe has been said, and please tell me if I got it wrong. That we accepted the broad brush of the governance report in front of us, but we add in is it the correct terminology, the council observer can continue until a further decision is made, and that Sentinel agreed to come to the council once or twice a year, or as requested, when there's big issues, because there may be big issues one year for 3 or 4 meetings, we don't know yet, to do presentations as and when requested. Have I got the gist of it right?
Sorry, yeah, I thought we were going with that. In essence, we agree the revisions to the governance and the board structure, but actually the 2.1, yeah, agreed, but certainly 2.2 in essence is kind of taken off of the agenda. That's not agreed in its current form, and I think we look at that moving forward. So not a change to us replacing the observer status with attendance at council twice a year. We kind of park that discussion and kind of save that for another day.
I'm seeing some nods around the table. Tracy.
Yeah, so I was just going to add that I think what you were suggesting, Mike, also was that we take that away and we work together on defining what the role of the observer should be at board, so as each party gets value out of that. So I have to put my glasses on to hear you. Yeah.
I like that a lot. I'll put my microphone on to speak. Just to say, I don't want to lose the scrutiny element either, because the valuable thing of coming to a committee and engaging with all members, all parties, is key. I know we're never going to go back to having, multiple representatives, but the mechanism we have here to achieve some sort of democratic involvement is key. So I respect that. Thank you.
Sorry, can I come back there? That part was kind of talked about in losing the observer member. Would you be happy to work up that relationship in terms of reporting back to a wider committee as part of the work done to establish what the role of the observer member would be? Because it might be that you don't need both.
Can I, as chairman, split this from 2.1 and 2.2? Can we agree that 2.1, we leave 2.2 out of it for time, can we agree on 2.1? Is that genuinely agreed? Thank you. So now we're on to 2.2. We can either agree to leave it for further discussion and with the officers and another paper to come back. Bearing in mind tonight's comments, or we can try and resolve it tonight. But I think we might be, Councillor Gavin James.
I think it makes sense to remove it for a time for thought, because clearly it'd be nice to get a consensus. What I would like to add, though, is I'd like to we've had a letter from the current representative, but I'd like a bit more of a detailed report about what the observer has achieved while sitting on that over the past 12 months, what changes have been made, and a stronger view from Sentinel. Again, we talk about the individual, we'll talk about the role itself, about what they feel has been contributed by that, because if we are going to be in a situation where we have a choice of an observer or 6 monthly public scrutiny where more councillors get the opportunity, I have to say at the moment I favour the latter. But of course, because I've not sat there, unlike Laura, I've not had the opportunity to sit on these things and sit as an observer, so I don't know exactly or understand what the contribution or achievements of the observer has been. And until I understand that, I'm not sure I want to swap one for the other. So I think it's right we park it, but we do come back to it because I quite like that. At the moment, I feel the scrutiny idea in a committee situation would actually be better than this. But I'm happy to be persuaded. But I'm not being persuaded tonight. But there's no rush to make this decision.
The officer comes in there.
That's what I was suggesting, actually, that the piece of work looked at what the role of the observer board member is now, assesses how valuable or otherwise that might be, look at what it might be and what it would need to be, or should it be delivered differently by another means, i.e. the meetings you would, so that piece of work could take place.
So at the moment we have passed 2-1, 2-2 is deferred for further work. Councillor Mrs James.
I don't think that that's what we were saying. I think we were sort of saying that that's deferred but it's how we develop that relationship and look at how we can improve it, not do we not have it. I think we need to say it's really valuable. How do we get the best out of it so that Sentinel and the borough benefit from it? In relation to those confidential papers, there's invaluable information there that could help us shape our housing strategy, and we should be using that information, and we should be looking at what we do, and the information that is there comes back into the borough and informs the work of the borough, and it needs to be a two-way relationship in relation to the housing strategy. It needs to be a conduit in relation to what that person takes to the board. It's a strategic board, and it's an essential role, and we could really do some great things if we just approached it differently, and it would be a great loss.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I think that we need to have both options looked at in the piece of work. I think we need to look at the role of the observer, as Councillor Gavin-Jones said, and also compare and contrast that with the option of having you come here to some kind of scrutiny, and whether that would be better and how that would improve the process that we already have. And if you're happy to do that, if you're happy to do that, then that would be great. Thank you. So can I have one person talking? Thank you. If you're happy to do that, then I think generally the committee would like to look at both options.
Yeah, I thought that's what we kind of had proposed, really, was that we looked at it in the round and then make a decision moving forward. Yeah, quite.
In which case, councillors?
Sure, it wasn't an either or, it was, that's a clue.
Yeah, just to clarify, 2-2 we're looking at in the whole round of how to improve things, yes. Right, in which case the paper B is concluded. Thank you very much. Meeting's finished at 9:10.